The empty frame waited for her before her husband did. London, May 1854, had dressed itself in pale sunshine for Lady Lucetta Penrose's wedding morning, but by the time the private chapel service ended and the carriage brought her through the iron gates of Dunsmore House. In Mayfair, the light had turned thin and grey against the windows, as if even the sky understood that no celebration had truly begun. She had expected a breakfast, perhaps a receiving line of polite faces, perhaps one of those careful smiles by which powerful families disguised inconvenience as welcome. Instead, the footman opened the doors to silence. No music drifted from the drawing-room. No cluster of cousins waited beneath flowers. No laughing bridesmaids whispered over the hem of her gown. The house received her like a document delivered for signature. At the base of the great staircase, Sir Otho Penrose touched her elbow, not quite hard enough to bruise and not gently enough to be mistaken for affection. "Stand straight, Lucetta," he murmured. "You are a duchess now. Do try to look grateful." She did stand straight. She had been standing straight through worse things than gratitude for most of her life. The ivory silk of her wedding gown rustled softly as she lifted her chin. Though the bodice had been altered twice to hide how much weight she had lost during the weeks of negotiation, her veil had already been removed in the chapel vestry, leaving only a narrow line of pearls along her dark hair. She could feel the eyes of the servants upon her, quick and trained and carefully blank. Beyond them stood the Dowager Duchess of Blackmere, dressed in steel-grey satin, and beside her Lady Nerissa Coldharbour, all pale rose muslin and golden composure. Nerissa's smile held the delicacy of a knife wrapped in lace. "This way," the Dowager said. "Not welcome, not my dear, only this way." Lucetta followed her through a corridor lined with marble busts and old hunting scenes until they reached a pair of tall doors. A footman opened them. The long gallery stretched before her, narrow and magnificent, its polished floor reflecting generations of painted men who had all learned how to look immortal from a canvas. Dukes of Blackmere stared down in powdered wigs, military coats, velvet robes, and parliamentary black. Their wives appeared less often, placed beside chairs or behind children, pale hands resting on cradles, prayer books, or the shoulders of sons. At the far end of the gallery stood an easel draped in black silk. Above it, already mounted on the wall, was an empty gilded frame. Lucetta stopped before she meant to. The frame was large enough for a full-length portrait of a boy, not yet born. A future child had been given a place before she had been given a chair. Only then did Gareth Dunsmore, Duke of Blackmere, turn from the window. He had not ridden beside her from the chapel. He had not offered a word after the vows. In the church, his voice had been steady, his hand gloved, his face controlled with the kind of discipline that made warmth seem almost vulgar. Now, in the ancestral light of his own house, he looked even colder. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and severe in a black morning coat that fitted him with merciless perfection. His dark hair was brushed back from a face made handsome by restraint rather than softness. He did not look cruel in the ordinary way. That would have been easier. He looked like a man who had buried every tenderness he possessed and called the grave duty. Sir Otho bowed with quick eagerness. "Your Grace, my niece is honoured beyond measure." Lucetta waited for the Duke to deny or accept that statement. He did neither. His eyes moved to her face, then to the empty frame, then back again. "The honour," he said, "will depend upon whether the arrangement fulfills its purpose." A small sound passed through the room. It might have been Nerissa breathing in. It might have been one of the servants shifting near the door. Lucetta did not move. The Dowager Duchess stepped forward with a small velvet case in her hands. It was old, deep blue, and worn at the corners. "There is a custom in this house," she said. "Every Duchess of Blackmere is given this upon entering the family." Lucetta accepted the case because refusing it would have given them the satisfaction of seeing her hands tremble. Inside lay a small silver hourglass pendant, no longer than her thumb, delicate and beautifully made. Fine pale sand rested in one glass bulb, waiting to fall into the other. The chain was thin, bright, and cold. "It hung in the old nursery," the dowager continued, "a reminder that time belongs to the house. A wife may have her sentiments, but a duchy survives by sons." Lady Nerissa lowered her lashes. "How moving," she said softly. "Such a tender tradition." Lucetta looked at the pendant. She wondered how many women had worn it while being told to wait, to hope, to endure, to produce. She wondered how many had smiled beneath portraits while strangers counted months on their fingers. Before she could close the case, the dowager took the chain, stepped behind her, and fastened it at Lucetta's throat. The motion was brisk, too brisk. The chain caught against the fine skin above Lucetta's collarbone, then slipped lower. The pendant rested just beneath her wedding pearls, bright as a tiny instrument of judgment. Lucetta's right hand rose by instinct to steady it. The dowager's fingers closed over her wrist and pressed it down. Let it be seen. The pressure lasted only a second, but the chain bit into Lucetta's skin where it crossed her wrist. She felt the small sting. She did not look down. Gareth did. His gaze flicked to the mark, a narrow red line beneath the edge of her glove. Something moved in his face, but it was gone before anyone could name it. Sir Otho gave a nervous laugh, a useful reminder for a young bride. Lucetta has always needed guidance. "Useful," Gareth repeated. His voice was quiet, but it changed the temperature of the gallery. Sir Otho's smile faltered. The Duke looked at him fully for the first time. "Do not call my wife useful." The words should have warmed her. They did not. A man could object to the language of ownership and still believe in the ownership itself. Lucetta had learned that distinction long before she entered Dunsmore House. "Of course, Your Grace," Sir Otho said quickly. "I meant only that she understands her good fortune." Gareth turned back to Lucetta. "Do you?" he asked. There was no gentleness in it, no curiosity either. It was a question posed like a term in a contract. Lucetta felt Nerissa watching. She felt the dowager waiting. She felt Sir Otho's warning from the carriage still hovering at her shoulder. "Do not embarrass me. Do not fail us. Do not forget what depends upon your obedience." She closed the velvet case with a soft click. The sound traveled farther than it should have. "I understand," she said, "that I have been brought to a gallery before I have been brought to a home." Nerissa's fan paused. The dowager's mouth tightened. Gareth's eyes sharpened, not with anger exactly, but with attention. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps he had expected gratitude. Perhaps he had expected a frightened bride who would lower her eyes and make his duty easier to bear. Lucetta had no intention of being easy. The Duke walked toward her, stopping with a formal distance between them. "Then let there be no misunderstanding between us," he said. "This marriage was made for the preservation of Blackmere. Affection was not promised. Sentiment was not negotiated. You will have every courtesy due to your rank, every comfort this house can provide, and every protection my name affords. But you are here to produce an heir, and nothing more." There it was, not whispered, not implied, spoken beneath painted ancestors and an empty frame. With the bride still in silk, and the ink of the register hardly dry, Lucetta heard Sir Otho exhale, as if relieved that someone else had finally said aloud what he had been selling in private. She heard the faint rustle of Nerissa's skirts. She heard the tiny shift of sand inside the pendant as it swung once against her bodice. For one dangerous moment, she felt the room narrow around her, not from fear, from fury held so tightly it became stillness. She thought of her father, dead 3 years, who had once told her that a woman's dignity was easiest to lose when she tried to prove she had it. She thought of her younger sister at Penrose Cottage. Depending on money, Sir Otho could withhold. She thought of the physician's careful notes, of the half-sentences that had followed her like smoke, of women lowering their voices when she entered rooms. She thought of the empty frame waiting for a son, while the wife stood unnamed beneath it. Then she looked directly at her husband. "Does your grace keep a clock for a wife's soul as well?" Silence struck the gallery. It did not fall gently. It cracked through the polished air and left everyone inside it exposed. Gareth did not answer. For the first time since the chapel, he seemed not cold, but caught. His gaze dropped again, almost unwillingly, to the red mark at her wrist where the pendant chain had bitten. Lucetta lowered her hand before he could study it further. She would not have her pain become the first tenderness between them. Not yet, not here. The dowager recovered first. A Duchess of Blackmere must learn restraint. "Then I am fortunate," Lucetta replied, still looking at Gareth, "for I have been trained in it since childhood." Sir Otho made a small warning sound. Gareth heard it. His head turned. "Sir Otho, you may leave the Duchess to the housekeeper's care. I will send for you if the solicitor requires anything further." The dismissal was unmistakable. Sir Otho flushed but bowed. Nerissa's smile returned, thinner now. "I hope Blackmere brings you everything you deserve, Duchess." Lucetta met her eyes. "I have often found that people do receive what they deserve, Lady Nerissa, only not always on the day they expect it." Nerissa looked away first. That small victory did not make Lucetta feel triumphant. It made her tired. When the servants finally guided her from the long gallery toward the rooms prepared for her, she kept her shoulders level and her steps measured. Behind her, the empty frame remained on the wall, waiting with all the patience of a threat. Gareth did not follow at once, yet as Lucetta crossed the threshold, she felt his gaze on the pendant, on the chain, on the wrist she had hidden in the folds of her gown. It was not love, it was not even regret, but it was the first fracture in his certainty. That night, when the house had gone quiet, and her bridal chamber glowed with candles she had not requested, Lucetta removed the silver hourglass from her throat. The skin beneath it felt cold. The red line at her wrist had deepened to a narrow mark. She placed the pendant back inside its velvet case, carried it to the corridor, and set it outside her locked door. Then she turned the key herself. For the first time that day, she breathed. The locked door did not surprise Gareth. The velvet case outside it did. For several seconds, he stood in the candle-lit corridor of Dunsmore House and looked down at the small blue box resting upon the carpet as if someone had placed a verdict at his feet. Behind the polished oak door, his bride made no sound, no weeping, no pleading, no frantic movement of a woman afraid of her husband, only silence. It was not the helpless silence he had expected from a young wife caught inside an arrangement larger than herself. It was deliberate, chosen. A silence with a key turned in it. Gareth bent and lifted the box. The silver hourglass pendant lay inside, its chain folded with care, its pale sand resting motionless in one bulb. He should have been offended. The Duke of Blackmere had been denied entrance to his own wife's chamber on his wedding night. Men of his rank had built entire reputations upon taking offense at less. Yet offense would not come. All he could see was the narrow red line at Lucetta's wrist, where the chain had bitten into her skin, and the way she had hidden it. Before he could ask whether it pained her, he closed the box softly. Downstairs the clock struck 2. The sound moved through the house in a solemn procession, one room answering another until the final note faded into the old walls. Gareth had grown up with those clocks. His father had insisted they be kept exact. A house without time becomes a house without order, the late Duke used to say, and a house without sons becomes a house without a future. Gareth had believed him. He had believed many dead men, because dead men did not have to look into a living woman's face after turning her into a duty. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped. If she had locked the door, she had already answered him. Instead, he stepped back and told the footman at the far end of the passage, "No one is to disturb her grace. No one is to ask whether I entered this room. No one is to repeat that I did not." The young footman bowed so quickly that his powdered hair nearly slipped out of order. "Yes, Your Grace." Gareth's voice lowered. "If I hear one whisper below stairs, I will know it began with someone who values gossip more than service." "Yes, Your Grace." He turned away with the velvet case in his hand, but the corridor felt longer than it had when he arrived. The house had been prepared for a bridal night with the efficiency of a campaign. Fresh candles, warmed sheets, rose water, a supper tray covered in silver. All the small arrangements by which servants pretended not to know what marriage demanded. Gareth had not questioned any of it. That was the shame of it. He had allowed the machinery of the house to move around Lucetta as if she were another object carried from chapel to chamber, and then he had spoken the sentence that made the machinery honest. He walked without choosing a destination, past the closed drawing room, past the staircase, past the portraits of men whose names he had been taught before nursery prayers. Only when the air changed did he realize he had returned to the long gallery. The moon had risen beyond the tall windows, whitening the floorboards and leaving the painted faces in shadow. At the far end, the empty frame gleamed faintly. It looked less like promise now and more like appetite. Gareth stood beneath it and opened the velvet case again. The little hourglass caught the moonlight. He remembered it from childhood. It had hung near the nursery mantel, high above the reach of small hands. His mother had once taken it down during a storm when he was 5, placing it in his palm to distract him from thunder. "Do you see, Gareth?" she had whispered. "The sand falls because it must, but we need not be cruel because time passes." He had forgotten that, or worse, he had remembered only the object and not the mercy attached to it. A sound reached him then, not from the bridal chamber, from the antechamber beside the gallery where the old nursery corridor began. Gareth turned. A line of light showed beneath the half-open door. He crossed the gallery quietly and pushed it wider. Lucetta sat in a high-backed chair near the unlit nursery hearth, still wearing her ivory wedding gown, though she had removed the pearls from her hair. They lay on a small table beside a folded handkerchief and a torn scrap of paper. Her posture was perfect. That somehow wounded him more than if she had been collapsed with grief. She looked like a woman holding herself upright because no one else in the room had earned the right to see her bend. Her eyes moved from his face to the velvet case in his hand. I wondered whether someone would retrieve it. Not someone, Gareth said. Me. That distinction has not yet proved comforting. He accepted the blow because it was deserved. No. She looked toward the cold hearth. I did not take your room from you, if that is why you came. I took mine back before it could be claimed. I did not come to claim it. The words sounded thin, almost useless. He had come expecting to do exactly what husbands were permitted to do. If not tonight, then eventually, because duty had made him think. Permission was a courtesy rather than a requirement. Lucetta heard the weakness in his answer. Her mouth softened for a moment, not with tenderness, but with sorrowful intelligence. You did not need to say it aloud for the house to know. Gareth stepped no closer. Are you afraid of me? No. Her answer came at once. That would be simpler. Then, what do you fear? She gave a quiet laugh, empty of amusement. Being made useful. Being watched by calendars. Being congratulated for surrendering before I have been asked whether I can bear the terms. Being told that rank is protection when it is also the wall around me. The velvet case felt heavier in his hand. Lucetta. It was the first time he had used her name without title. She looked back at him, and he saw fatigue beneath the composure. Not fragility. Fatigue, the kind produced by years of bracing for impact. I will not be wound like an air clock, she said. Not by your mother. Not by my uncle. Not by you. Gareth could have defended himself. He could have said that the duchy required certainty, that his father had died with debts of expectation rather than coin, that every tenant, servant, dependent cousin, and distant pensioner lived beneath the stability of the Blackmere name. All of that was true. None of it answered her. His gaze fell to her wrist. In the thin candlelight, the red line had darkened where the chain had pressed. A small bruise was forming just below the bone. He took one step, then stopped. May I see it? Lucetta's fingers closed over her wrist. For a moment he thought she would refuse, and he prepared himself to accept it. Then slowly, watching him as if measuring whether his restraint was performance or principle, she extended her hand. Gareth set the velvet case on the table before he approached. He did not take her wrist at first. He held his own hand beneath it, palm upward, giving her the choice to rest her arm there or withdraw. After a breath, she lowered her wrist into his hand. Her skin was cool. The bones felt fine and tense, but not weak. He touched the mark with the lightest pressure of his thumb and felt her breath catch, though she did not pull away. Did my mother do this? He asked. The chain did it. That is not what I asked. Her eyes lifted to his. Something flickered there. Surprise, perhaps, that he had not accepted the polite lie. Yes, she said. Not enough to matter. Gareth released her before anger could turn his hold into another form of force. It matters, does it? The question was quiet. Or does it matter because it is visible? He had no answer ready. The silence between them changed. It no longer belonged to the locked door. It belonged to the wound beneath his own understanding. I did not ask what you feared, he said at last. That was my first wrong. Lucetta drew back her hand, not sharply, but with decision. Your first spoken wrong, perhaps. He bowed his head once. A duke's apology, if it came at all, was usually shaped to preserve authority. Gareth found he had no authority worth preserving in that chair-lit room. Yes, he said, perhaps. Her gaze shifted to the folded scrap on the table. He followed it, but she moved one hand over the paper before he could read more than a fragment, a date. Dr. Quist's name, a line cut across the page where something had been removed. That is mine, she said. Then I will not touch it. You will ask your solicitor about me tomorrow. I will ask my solicitor about the arrangement, not about your body, without your consent. She studied him as if she wanted to believe that and distrusted the desire. Words are easy at night. Then judge me in the morning. The moment he said it, the phrase seemed to strike them both. Morning was not far. Already the darkest part of the night was thinning at the windows. Lucetta looked suddenly tired enough to vanish into the pale silk around her. You should go, Your Grace. Gareth picked up the velvet case, then placed it on the table beside her instead of taking it away. It is yours now, but it should never have been given as a command. She did not thank him. He was grateful for that. As he reached the door, her voice stopped him. What will you tell them? He looked back, that the Duchess of Blackmere is not to be discussed below stairs, above stairs, or anywhere in my hearing. That our private rooms are private. That my mother is not to place anything upon you again without your permission. Lucetta's expression did not soften, but something guarded in it, shifted by the width of a candle flame. And Sir Otho will learn that access to you is not part of his settlement. That answer touched the room more deeply than he expected. Lucetta lowered her eyes first. Good night, Gareth. His name, spoken by her without title, held neither forgiveness nor affection, yet it passed through him with the force of something he had not deserved. Good night, Lucetta. He left before he could ask for more. At dawn, the long gallery was washed in colourless light. Gareth stood alone beneath the empty frame with the chill of the old house in his bones. In a few hours, the dowager would demand explanations. Sir Otho would press for assurances. Nerissa Coldharbour would smile as if she had scented weakness in the walls. The solicitor would come with ledgers, clauses, dates, and obligations. But for that single moment, Gareth saw only a bride in ivory silk sitting beside a cold nursery hearth, guarding a torn scrap of her own history from the husband who had not yet earned the truth. His throat tightened. He pressed one hand against the empty frame, as if he could steady the whole rotten inheritance by force. He could not. The first tear fell before he knew he had surrendered it. No one saw. That made it worse. He was not performing remorse. He was discovering it. When the house began to stir, the Duke of Blackmere dried his face, rang for his secretary, and gave his first clear order of the day. Send for Mr. Holbury and the Blackmere Heir ledger at once. The Blackmere Heir ledger arrived before breakfast, carried into the Duke's study by Mr. Holbury with both hands, as though the book were not leather and paper, but a sleeping animal that might wake hungry. Gareth had not slept. The morning light showed him no mercy. It revealed tiredness at the corners of his eyes, the faint crease between his brows, and the untouched coffee cooling beside a stack of correspondence already sorted by rank, urgency, and inconvenience. Outside the study windows, Mayfair moved into its ordinary rituals. Carriage wheels passed over damp stones. A flower seller called softly at the square. Somewhere below, servants prepared trays, polished silver, and whispered nothing because the Duke had forbidden them to whisper. Mr. Holbury placed the ledger on the desk and removed his gloves. He was a thin, careful man of 45, with the expression of a solicitor who had learned that aristocratic families often used the word tradition when they meant concealment. Your Grace requested the family succession volume and the marriage settlement memoranda. All of them, Gareth said. Not the summary. Mr. Holbury hesitated for one fraction of a second. It was enough. Gareth looked up. Is there a reason you would prefer the summary? No, Your Grace, only that some entries are historical rather than operative. Histories is often where families bury the operative things. The solicitors inclined his head and opened the ledger. The first pages smelled faintly of dust, ink, and old calfskin. Dukes of Blackmere had written themselves into permanence there. Marriage dates, settlement sums, births, sons, stillbirths recorded with chilling brevity. Daughters mentioned by courtesy, sometimes only when their dowries left the estate. Wives appeared between transactions, their names attached to outcomes, their bodies translated into continuity. Gareth had seen the ledger before as a boy, when his father placed one hand on his shoulder and told him that a duke was not a man first. He was a bridge. At 12, Gareth had been proud of that. At 34, with Lucetta's voice still in his ears, he saw the cruelty of a bridge built across women and calling itself noble. "Here," Mr. Holbury said. He turned to the newest section, where Gareth's marriage had already been entered in a clerk's neat hand. Gareth's name came first, bold and black. Lucetta's followed, smaller only because the line allowed less room. Beneath it sat a notation attached to the settlement. In the absence of issue within 3 years, certain Penrose obligations to be adjusted under separate rider. Gareth's eyes stilled. Separate rider, a financial provision, Your Grace, drafted during negotiations by Sir Otho Penrose's man and reviewed in outline by the late Lord Egerton before it came through my office. Reviewed in outline, Gareth repeated. Not approved in full. Mr. Holbury's mouth tightened. The final copy arrived with considerable urgency. Your Grace was in Kent at the time. Gareth remembered a boundary dispute at Blackmere Abbey, a tenant fever in the East Cottages, his mother's letters pressing the marriage forward, Sir Otho's assurance that delay would damage the girl's prospects. The girl. Even in memory, he had not called Lucetta a woman. "Does the Duchess know of this rider?" he asked. Mr. Holbury lowered his gaze. "I cannot say." "Then say what you can." It was represented that Lady Lucetta was aware of all material terms through her guardian. Gareth closed his hand on the arm of his chair. Guardian. Another word men used when they meant gatekeeper. "Send for the rider." The original at once. "And Mr. Holbury." The solicitor paused. "Yes, Your Grace." "Until I authorize it, Sir Otho Penrose is not to receive copies of any paper touching the Duchess's person, settlement, health, correspondence, or household allowance. If he objects, you will send him to me." Mr. Holbury's brows rose slightly. "That may cause displeasure." "I am counting on it." A knock sounded before the solicitor could answer. The butler entered with a silver salver and a visiting card placed at the centre like a pale accusation. "Lady Nerissa Coldharbour has called, Your Grace. The Dowager Duchess is receiving her in the morning room. Her ladyship asked whether her Grace would be visible." Gareth looked at the card. Nerissa Coldharbour's name curved across it in elegant black script. In the lower corner, almost hidden by the engraved border, were 2 initials pressed faintly into the paper. N.C. The same letters Mr. Holbury had just shown him on a small note clipped near the settlement packet. Perhaps it was coincidence. Aristocratic life was crowded with initials. Yet Gareth had begun to distrust coincidence when it arrived perfumed. "Where is the Duchess?" "In the blue sitting room, Your Grace." "Mrs. Alder is with her." Gareth rose. "Tell my mother Lady Nerissa may wait." The butler's face remained professionally blank, but his silence had weight. Ladies like Nerissa did not wait, unless someone wished them to understand that they could be made to wait. "Yes, Your Grace." Lucetta stood near the blue sitting-room window when Gareth entered, wearing a morning gown of soft grey that made the silver hourglass pendant more visible against her throat. she had put it on again. Not as obedience, he thought, as evidence. The mark at her wrist had faded slightly, but not vanished. She turned, and for an instant he saw the question she did not ask. Had he come to demand breakfast? Apology? Surrender? Lady Nerissa Coldharbour has called, Gareth said. That was swift. You expected her. Women who enjoy wounds often come early to inspect whether they have deepened overnight. He almost smiled. Almost. The restraint between them did not allow it yet. You are not obliged to receive her. Lucetta's fingers brushed the pendant, not nervously, but as if confirming its weight. If I refuse, she will tell London I am already hiding. Let her tell London that I refused. That would make me smaller. He understood the correction before she finished speaking. Protection could become another locked door. Then receive her, he said. I will be present if you wish it. Beside me. The words were quiet, but they carried last night inside them. Not before me. Not instead of me. He bowed his head once. Beside you. A little of the guardedness in her face shifted. Not trust. Recognition of an attempt. They went together to the morning room, where the Dowager Duchess sat rigidly by the tea table, and Lady Nerissa Coldharbour had arranged herself in sunlight. Nerissa rose with graceful surprise, as if Lucetta's appearance had spoiled a performance prepared for absence. Your Grace, she said, curtsying to Lucetta first, because etiquette required it, and because obedience could be sharpened into mockery. How brave of you to receive callers so soon. How thoughtful of you to test my bravery before luncheon, Lucetta replied. The Dowager's teaspoon paused against porcelain. Gareth took his place near the mantel, not between the women, but close enough that the room could not pretend Lucetta had entered it alone. Nerissa's gaze flicked toward him, then back to the pendant at Lucetta's throat. I see the family hourglass suits you. Some women are born late to every duty, but a beautiful reminder may help time feel less severe. The words were soft enough to pass as nonsense. They did not pass. Lucetta crossed to the tea table and took the chair opposite her. She did not pour. How long has my calendar been a subject of your concern, Lady Nerissa? The question entered the room like a blade laid on velvet. Nerissa's fan opened. My dear Duchess, I meant only that marriage brings expectations. Does it bring them to your breakfast table as well, or only to mine? The Dowager inhaled. Lucetta. Gareth looked at his mother. The Duchess asked a fair question. Nerissa's smile held, but the skin near her eyes tightened. I would never presume to discuss what belongs between husband and wife. No, Lucetta said. You merely dress presumption as concern, and send it calling before the bride has finished her first morning in the house. For the first time, Gareth saw what Lucetta had been, before fear and debt and arrangements had pressed her into silence. Not loud, not rebellious in the careless way society condemned. Precise. Her dignity was not submission. It was discipline. Nerissa lowered her fan. I apologize if my affection for House Dunsmore made me clumsy. Affection should make a person careful, Lucetta said, not curious. The Dowager set her cup down. Lady Nerissa has long been a friend to this family. Then she will be relieved to know family privacy is now being restored, Gareth said. Both women turned to him. He kept his voice calm. There will be no discussion of the Duchess's health, private rooms, or future children in this house. Not by callers, not by relations, not by those who believe old friendship gives them a key. Nerissa's color changed so faintly that only someone watching for injury would have seen it. Lucetta did see it. Gareth saw Lucetta see it. Of course, Your Grace, Nerissa said. One would hate to give an impression of anxiety. Yes, Lucetta answered. Anxiety so often reveals where hope was never the motive. The visit did not last long after that. Nerissa left with all the elegance she had brought, but something brittle had entered her composure. When the door closed, the dowager stood. You risk making an enemy where you might have had an ally. Lucetta looked at her. An ally does not begin with my womb, and call it friendship. The dowager's mouth tightened, but Gareth spoke before she could. That will be enough for this morning. His mother stared at him as if he had altered the furniture of the world. Then she swept from the room with the cold dignity of a woman unused to being corrected by her own son. Lucetta remained by the tea-table. The victory had cost her. Gareth could see it in the stillness of her shoulders, in the way her left hand closed once around the edge of the chair before releasing it. He did not touch her. Part of him wanted to. That was precisely why he did not. "You stood beside me," she said without looking at him. "You asked me to. Most men hear such a request as decoration. I heard it as instruction." At that she turned. A fragile current passed between them. Not tenderness yet, but the possibility of one honest thing surviving in a house built from polished evasions. Mr. Halberry appeared at the door with a sealed packet in his hand, his expression grave. "Your Grace, the separate rider has been found." Gareth took it. The wax had been broken and resealed. In the margin beside the Heir clause, written in a newer ink than the rest, sat the same initials from Nerissa's card. N. Lucetta saw them. Her face did not change, but the room seemed to grow colder around her. "Tell me," she said, "not as your Duchess, as the woman whose life is written there." Gareth held the packet out so she could see it before he read another word. "Then we begin there." The separate rider did not look wicked at first glance. That was what made it wicked. It sat upon Gareth's desk beneath the morning light, written in a clerk's careful hand, with margins ruled straight and phrases chosen to sound like prudence. No vulgar threat appeared in it. No one had written that Lucetta Penrose would be punished if her body failed to satisfy a house that had already judged her. Instead, the paper spoke of contingencies, obligations, deferred sums, and protections. It was the language of civility arranged around a knife. Lucetta stood on the far side of the desk, with the silver hourglass pendant resting against her grey gown, the chain now fastened loosely because she had tied it herself. Mr. Halberry had withdrawn to the outer study to fetch the older settlement copies. Gareth remained beside the desk, not behind it. He had learned in the last 2 days how easily furniture could become a throne. "This clause was not read to me," Lucetta said. Her voice was calm. The calm had become more dangerous to him than tears. "Sir Otho said the settlement concerned my allowance, my jointure, and the cottage arrangements for my sister. The clause links those arrangements to the absence of issue after 3 years. Gareth kept his voice even, though shame moved beneath it like a current under ice. "If there is no child, the Penrose obligations are adjusted against your portion, and certain family protections may be reconsidered." Reconsidered. She repeated the word without expression. How elegant. It sounds almost charitable. "It should never have been included without your knowledge." Nothing concerning me seems to have required my knowledge. The statement did not accuse him alone. That was worse. It placed him among a long procession of men who had found convenience in her silence. Gareth looked down at the rider again. Near the margin, beside the Heir clause, the faint initials N.C. appeared in a notation that might have been a copying mark, though no solicitor of his would have initialed a ducal settlement with a lady's private hand. Lady Nerissa had no formal place in these negotiations, he said. No. Lucetta's mouth tightened. But women are often invited where cruelty requires a softer voice. Before he could answer, Mr. Halberry returned with a smaller packet tied in green tape. Your Grace, the older draft lacks the rider entirely. The change appears in the final copy only. There is one more matter. Gareth looked up. Speak. The solicitor glanced at Lucetta, then seemed to understand the new law of the room and addressed her as well. The rider references medical caution, but the attached note is incomplete. It cites Dr. Abel Quist, though it does not include his original memorandum. Lucetta's hand moved to her reticule. She drew out the torn scrap she had guarded the night before and laid it on the desk. A date, Dr. Quist's name. A line cut away. The paper looked small beneath the weight of the ledger, but Gareth felt the room narrow around it. I kept this because it was the only piece that came to me by accident, she said. A maid found it caught behind my aunt's writing table after Sir Otho's visit. I was told it meant I should be grateful any house would take the risk of me. What risk? Gareth asked. Lucetta's eyes met his. That is precisely what no one would say plainly. The words settled between them. Not barren, not ill, not doomed, only risk. That convenient fog in which reputations could be ruined without anyone proving a thing. Gareth turned to Mr. Halberry. Find Dr. Quist. I believe he still keeps rooms near Cavendish Square. Then send the carriage. Lucetta spoke before the solicitor moved. No. Gareth stopped. She had not raised her voice, but the single syllable held command. If Dr. Quist is to speak of me, I will be present. Mr. Halberry's eyes widened slightly. Gareth did not look at him. He looked only at his wife. 2 days ago, he might have said the matter was delicate. He might have offered to spare her embarrassment and thereby removed her from the truth again. Of course, he said. You will be present. Something in Lucetta's face altered. It was not softness. It was the brief, startled recognition of a door being opened instead of closed. Within the hour, they were received in Dr. Abel Quist's consulting room, a sober chamber above an apothecary's shop, with shelves of glass bottles, a mahogany desk, and a narrow window looking down upon the square. Dr. Quist was a compact man with silver hair, and the worried hands of someone who had spent too many years writing cautious sentences for powerful families. When he saw Lucetta, colour rose beneath his skin. Your Grace, Lady Lucetta. That is to say, Duchess, I had not expected. No, Lucetta said. I find I was not expected in most conversations about myself. Gareth watched the physician absorb that blow. It was cleanly delivered and impossible to resent without confessing guilt. Dr. Quist gestured toward the chairs. Lucetta sat. Gareth remained standing until she looked at him and said, Please sit, Your Grace. I would rather not be examined from above. He sat at once. Dr. Quist folded his hands. I must begin by saying I never gave any conclusion that Her Grace was unable to bear children. Silence followed. Gareth felt the words strike him with the force of both relief and fury. Lucetta did not move. Then what did you write? She asked. The physician reached for a worn apothecary almanac, its pages thick with notes, doses, household names, and dates. After your father's death, you suffered fainting episodes, irregular weakness, poor appetite, and signs of anemia. I recommended nourishment, rest, and protection from severe strain. I wrote that any immediate marital expectation should be approached with care until strength returned. That is all. Lucetta's gloved hands rested in her lap, and from that, someone made me a warning. Dr. Quist looked genuinely pained. I feared the note had been used beyond its meaning. A woman came for a copy, saying your guardian required family records. Mrs. Tamsin Vale, if I recall correctly, a former maid attached to the Penrose household. She seemed anxious but respectable. Later, Sir Otho requested confirmation of my caution. I gave him none beyond what I have stated. Gareth leaned forward. Did Lady Nerissa Coldharbour or anyone from Coldharbour House contact you? Dr. Quist hesitated. Not Lady Nerissa herself, but her companion, Miss Braid, called once. She asked whether household calendars were reliable in determining female health. I refused to discuss any patient. Lucetta's face went very still. Household calendars, Doctor. Quist opened the almanac to a marked page. Laundry records, sickroom entries, days of confinement, fainting episodes. Servants often note such things without considering their later use. Lucetta closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, there was no collapse in her expression, only recognition. After my father died, Mrs. Vale kept the linen and sickroom lists because I was too tired to manage them. She was kind to me. Kindness can be stolen, Gareth said. The physician's almanac lay open between them, and a loose page slipped from the ledger packet Gareth had brought, sliding toward the floor. Lucetta reached for it at the same moment he did. The Blackmere Heir ledger, balanced awkwardly on the edge of the desk, lurched beneath the movement. Gareth reacted, but he stopped himself before closing his hand over hers. "May I steady it?" he asked. The question was quiet, almost rough. Lucetta's gaze lifted to his face. The falling book seemed to pause with the whole room around it. "Yes," she said. Gareth placed his hand beneath hers against the leather cover, steadying the ledger without trapping her fingers. Her hand remained there, light but present, her glove brushing his skin at the edge of his cuff. It was nothing by the measure of marriage. It was everything by the measure of trust, Doctor. Quist looked away with the tact of a man who understood that some intimacies were made not by boldness, but by restraint. Lucetta did not withdraw at once. "No page about me," she said, still looking at the ledger beneath their joined hands, "will be opened again without me." Gareth felt the sentence enter him like an oath he had not yet earned but intended to keep. No page about you will be opened again without you. Only then did she draw her hand back. The ledger remained steady. So did he, though it cost him more than he expected. Doctor. Quist cleared his throat and returned to the almanac. "There is another irregularity. One date cited in the copied caution is not mine. It appears to have been inserted later, possibly from a domestic calendar, rather than a medical note." Gareth's attention sharpened. "Can you identify it?" "Not yet. But if Mrs. Vale kept the original linen calendar, it may show whether the copied dates were rearranged." Lucetta rose. "Then we must find Mrs. Vale." "We will," Gareth said. She turned to him quickly, as if bracing for command. He corrected himself before the old habit could stand. "If you wish to." A faint, humorless smile touched her mouth. "I wish to know who has been counting me." When they returned to Dunsmore House, a note waited on a salver in the hall. The butler presented it to Gareth, but the envelope was addressed to the Duchess of Blackmere. Gareth did not take it. He looked to Lucetta. She accepted the note and broke the seal herself. Her face changed as she read. "From Lady Nerissa," she said, "an invitation to a portrait subscription evening at Coldharbour House." Gareth's expression hardened. "For what portrait?" Lucetta held out the card. Beneath the graceful script, in a hand too elegant to be innocent, stood the words, "For the future Marquess of Blackmere." The silver hourglass at Lucetta's throat gave a small, soundless flash in the afternoon light. She looked at Gareth, and for the first time since the wedding, Anger stood in her eyes without disguise. "It seems," she said, "that London has been invited to admire the frame before the child. Coldharbour House had been arranged to look innocent. That was the first sign of malice. Its drawing rooms glowed with candlelight, white lilac, and pale blue ribbons tied upon the backs of chairs, every detail chosen to suggest celebration rather than judgment. A harp stood near the bay window. Silver trays passed between clusters of guests who spoke in soft voices and turned their heads just late enough to pretend they had not been waiting for the Duchess of Blackmere to enter. Above the mantel, covered in gauze, stood a tall empty frame wreathed with lilies. Beneath it rested a subscription book bound in cream leather, its first page headed in Lady Nerissa Coldharbour's elegant hand. For the future Marquess of Blackmere. Lucetta saw it before anyone spoke her name. The words did not strike like a blow. A blow was honest. This was worse. This was a room full of smiling people being asked to admire her erasure as though it were a charitable work. Gareth stood beside her at the threshold, not before her. He had asked in the carriage whether she wished to attend at all. She had answered yes, because absence would be taken for shame, and because she had decided, somewhere between Dr. Quist's almanac and Nerissa's invitation, that she would no longer permit strangers to discuss her body in rooms she was too polite to enter. Now the room turned toward them with the smooth hunger of society. Lady Nerissa came forward in pale green silk, her beauty sharpened by triumph, carefully veiled as welcome. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying first to Lucetta. "How very gracious of you to come. I feared you might find the theme too tender so soon after your marriage." "Tenderness rarely requires a guest list," Lucetta said. Nerissa's lashes fluttered. "You misunderstand me. This little evening is only a gesture of affection for House Dunsmore. A future portrait fund. Surely every ancient family must look forward." "Some appear to be looking past the present occupant," Lucetta replied. A faint tremor of amusement passed through the guests, quickly smothered. Gareth felt it move through the room like a draught. His face remained controlled, but his hand tightened once against the head of his cane. He did not speak. Not yet. This was Lucetta's entrance, and he would not steal it by turning outrage into a ducal performance. Sir Otho Penrose emerged from beside an elderly countess, his cheeks already warm with wine and importance. "Lucetta, my dear, do not be prickly. Lady Nerissa has done the house a kindness. 3 years is generous, after all." The room quieted. There it was, the clause dressed for company. Lucetta looked at her uncle. His cravat was too high, his waistcoat too new, purchased, no doubt, with money he had persuaded someone else to owe. "Generous to whom, Sir Otho?" she asked. "To a woman whose marriage has been converted into a calendar, or to the men waiting to profit from each month?" His smile stiffened. "You speak too sharply for a young duchess, and you speak too comfortably for a guardian." Nerissa intervened with practiced softness. "Perhaps we should not trouble her Grace with details. The subscription is voluntary, of course, merely a symbolic pledge toward the portrait of the little lord who will one day unite hope and heritage." She turned, and a footman lifted the gauze from the frame. Empty gilt flashed beneath the candles. Someone sighed as though beauty had been revealed. Lucetta stared at the blank center. It was not the empty frame in Dunsmore House, not the ancestral one mounted beneath the gaze of dead dukes. This was its social echo, prettier and more obscene because it had been made for entertainment. There was no child, no face, no life. only a space into which everyone had poured expectation before Lucetta had been allowed to pour tea in peace. A young matron near the subscription table whispered, not quietly enough, "Poor thing, it must be dreadful to feel everyone counting." Another answered, "Well, a duchess must expect scrutiny." Gareth's eyes moved toward them. They dropped their gazes at once. Nerissa opened the book. "I thought it fitting for you to sign first, Duchess. A mother's hope, even before God grants the blessing, has such power." She held out the pen. It glittered with a pearl handle. Lucetta did not take it. The room waited. Gareth could feel every expectation fasten upon his wife. They expected retreat, tears, perhaps a small laugh, to make the insult easier for everyone else to enjoy. Instead, Lucetta stepped to the table and looked down at the first page. Several names had already been written beneath the heading: Lady Coldharbour, the Dowager Countess of Mervale, Sir Otho Penrose. Each had pledged money toward a portrait of an absence. Near the margin sat a small set of initials, N.C., in the same hand Gareth had seen beside the rider. Lucetta saw them too. Her face did not change, but the silver hourglass at her throat caught the candlelight as she bent over the page. "How strange," she said. "My name appears to have been assumed." Nerissa's smile thinned. "Only in spirit. Naturally, we knew you would wish to support the family's future." "Did you?" Lucetta took the pen at last. The room breathed again, relieved by the familiar shape of female compliance. Then she drew one clean line through the blank space where Nerissa had left room for her signature. The scratch of the nib sounded indecently loud. "I will not pledge money toward my own erasure." A porcelain cup clicked sharply against its saucer. Sir Otho stepped forward. "Lucetta." Gareth moved then one pace only, enough to stand at her side before her uncle could come nearer. "You will address her as the Duchess of Blackmere in this room?" Sir Otho reddened. "Your Grace, surely among family, especially among family." Nerissa closed the subscription book with a soft thud. "This is becoming unfortunate." Lucetta turned to her. "No, Lady Nerissa, it became unfortunate when you invited London to admire a frame before the child and the child before the wife. You choose to see insult where affection was intended. Affection should have asked whether I wished my body turned into a public subscription." Silence. True silence now, not polite anticipation. Several guests looked toward Gareth, waiting for him to smooth the matter over, to rescue the room from the discomfort of a woman naming what had been done to her. He saw the old path open before him. A few diplomatic words, a promise that the Duchess was fatigued, a careful withdrawal that preserved Coldharbour pride and Dunsmore convenience. It would cost Lucetta everything, and him almost nothing. That was how he recognized it as cowardice. Gareth took the subscription book from the table. Nerissa made a small sound. "Your Grace, that is the property of this house." "No," he said. "It is an instrument of presumption bearing my title." He opened the first page, read the heading once, and closed it again. "House Dunsmore withdraws all patronage from this subscription. No portrait will be commissioned under my name for a child who does not exist, and no gathering will use my wife's dignity as decoration." Lady Nerissa went very pale. Sir Otho stared at him as if he had violated nature itself. "But the future of Blackmere is not improved by humiliating the Duchess of Blackmere." Gareth set the book down, not violently, but with finality. "This evening is over for us." He turned to Lucetta, and in that moment the whole room watched for the shape of his command. He did not command. He offered his arm with the formal precision due a duchess before society. "Would you permit me to escort you home?" Lucetta looked at his arm. The gesture was proper, public, harmless by the rules of etiquette. Yet between them it held the memory of the locked door, the wrist he had asked to see, the ledger he had steadied only after her permission. He had not taken the scene from her. He had stood where the room could not pretend she stood alone. Slowly, she placed her gloved hand upon his sleeve, not because the room expected it, because she chose to. "Yes," she said, "I would." The faint pressure of her hand traveled through him with startling force. It was not intimacy by any common measure. It was trust no larger than the width of her fingers, and he understood that such a thing could be crushed by carelessness. They crossed the room together. No one stopped them. The path opened because rank demanded it, but the silence that followed was not obedience alone. It was the sound of people realizing they had mistaken a quiet woman for an available sacrifice. At the door, Lucetta paused and looked back at Nerissa. "You may keep the frame, Lady Nerissa. It suits an empty intention." Then she let Gareth lead her out. The night air beyond Cold Harbour House was cool enough to clear the scent of lilies from Lucetta's lungs. The carriage waited beneath the lamps, its black lacquer catching blurred reflections of candlelit windows. Gareth handed her in without touching more than etiquette allowed, then gave the direction to return to Dunsmore House only when the door closed, and the wheels began to turn did either of them speak. Lucetta sat across from him, the pendant resting against her throat, its sand falling steadily with each small jolt of the road. For once, she did not touch it. "You ended the subscription," she said. "You ended it first." With a line through a page. Some pages deserve it. A pause stretched between them, filled by the muted sound of hooves over stone. Gareth looked down at his hands. "I once believed the line mattered more than anything." Lucetta did not answer at once. In the passing lamplight, her face looked composed but not untouched. The evening had cost her. Her dignity had not protected her from pain. It had only prevented others from owning it. "Why?" she asked. The question was not gentle, but it was honest. Gareth looked toward the dark window. "My father died convinced that Blackmere had nearly ended with him. There were cousins ready to divide influence before he was in his grave, tenants anxious over leases, servants whispering about economies. My mother made grief into discipline because she did not know what else to do. I learned early that a duke without an heir is treated as a house already cracking. So you made me mortar." He closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." The word had no defense in it. When he opened them, she was watching him, not softened, not absolving, but listening. That alone felt more than he deserved. "I feared an empty line," he said quietly. "I did not ask whether you feared an empty life." The carriage turned into a darker street. Lucetta's hand rested on the seat between them, gloved fingers slightly curled. Gareth wanted to reach for it. He did not. Desire, he was beginning to understand, could be as selfish as power if it moved faster than trust. Instead, he placed his own hand palm upward on the seat, halfway between them. An offering, nothing more. Lucetta looked at it. The carriage rolled on. A full minute passed. Then, slowly, she set her hand in his. He did not close his fingers at once. He let her feel the choice remain hers. Only when her thumb moved, lightly, against the side of his hand, did he fold his fingers around hers. The contact was restrained, proper enough even for a carriage with a footman outside and a driver above, but the stillness inside it felt profound. She did not forgive him. He did not ask her to. Her hand remained in his until Dunsmore House came into view. And in that small, sustained warmth, Gareth understood that a future could not be demanded from a woman. It had to be trusted into existence, one permitted touch at a time. By the time the carriage stopped before Dunsmore House, Lucetta had not withdrawn her hand, and Gareth had learned how long a man could remain still when stillness was the only honourable thing left to offer. The lamps above the portico burned low in the damp May air. A footman opened the carriage door, and the ordinary machinery of rank resumed at once. Steps were lowered. The butler appeared. A maid waited in the hall with a shawl, her eyes trained respectfully upon the floor. Lucetta's fingers loosened before anyone could see more than propriety permitted. Gareth released her at once. The loss of her hand was small and astonishingly sharp. She accepted his assistance down because a duchess might do so before servants, without surrendering anything private. But the moment her slipper touched the stone, she stood by her own balance. The silver hourglass at her throat had shifted during the ride. Its little stream of sand had emptied into the lower bulb. Gareth noticed. Lucetta noticed him noticing. Neither spoke of it. Inside the hall, Dunsmore House had the hushed brightness of a residence, pretending nothing had occurred. Candles had been refreshed. The black and white floor gleamed. A tray of letters waited on the console, already sorted by the hour of arrival. The butler, Mr. Rill, bowed. A packet has arrived for His Grace, and a note for Her Grace. Lucetta's shoulders did not move, but Gareth saw the faint tightening at the corner of her mouth. "At this hour?" she asked. "It was delivered shortly after your departure from Coldharbour House, Your Grace." Gareth did not reach for the note. That mattered now. Everything mattered now. "Will you take it here or in the morning room?" he asked. "Here." She removed her gloves slowly, not from nerves, but because she would not be rushed by a sealed insult. Mr. Rill presented the salver. The envelope was addressed in an unfamiliar hand to the Duchess of Blackmere. No crest marked the flap. Lucetta broke the seal herself. One folded paragraph lay inside, clipped from a society gossip sheet not yet dry. Gareth saw the bold black line before she passed it to him. The new Duchess of Blackmere departed Lady Nerissa, Coldharbour's most affectionate subscription evening, in visible distress, prompting whispers that Her Grace cannot bear even the gentlest reference to the subject every young wife must one day face. Lucetta looked at the words for a moment longer than they deserved. Then she folded the clipping along its original crease and set it back upon the salver. "How efficient London has become," she said. "It now knows my feelings before I have had time to choose them." Gareth's jaw hardened. "This will be answered." "By whom?" The question was soft. "If you answer for me, they will say I am hidden. If I answer alone, they will say I am defensive. Then we answer by refusing the premise." She looked at him. The hall seemed too public for the steadiness between them, yet too formal for anything true to be wasted. "And what is the premise?" "That your worth is a subject for public speculation." She held his gaze. "That is a better answer than I expected. I am learning how low your expectations of me have had to be." That struck her, not visibly enough for the servants to read, but enough for the room to change. She looked away first, toward the staircase, where her new rooms waited like a question she had not yet decided to trust. "I am tired, Gareth. Then nothing more tonight." He turned to Mr. Rill. "No caller is to be admitted tomorrow without Her Grace's approval. No gossip sheet enters the servants' hall. Send word to Mr. Holbury at first light. I want a formal demand drafted to Lady Nerissa, Coldharbour requiring the withdrawal of the subscription and a correction of the implication that Her Grace left in distress." "Yes, Your Grace." Lucetta lifted her head, not distress. Gareth looked back. No, no. Say I left because the subject was indecent. For the first time that day, something almost like grim admiration touched his eyes. Indecent, he said. The word will travel farther, because it is true. A footman near the door shifted as if the sentence had startled him. He recovered quickly. But Lucetta turned her attention upon him with the precision of a woman who had learned that servants often saw the truth before their betters permitted it. "You were on the carriage tonight," she said. The footman bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." "Your name?" "Thomas Reed, Your Grace." "Did you hear anything unusual at Cold Harbour House before we departed?" Gareth might have interrupted once. He might have said, "A duchess need not question a footman in the hall." Now he remained silent. Thomas's eyes flicked toward the Duke, then back to Lucetta. "Only a little, Your Grace. I was by the steps." Lady Nerissa's companion, Miss Braid, spoke to a maid near the side passage. She said the Penrose rooms had always been easy to enter if one knew when the younger sister needed airing. Lucetta went very still. Gareth saw the line of memory cross her face. Not surprise, confirmation of something she had feared without possessing proof. "Penrose rooms," she repeated. "Not Dunsmore. Penrose, Your Grace." "Thank you, Thomas." The footman bowed again, clearly relieved not to be scolded for hearing what no servant was supposed to hear. Gareth spoke to Mr. Rill. "Thomas is not to be dismissed, transferred, threatened, or questioned by anyone outside my presence or her Grace's. If Miss Braid's name is raised below stairs, it comes to me." "Yes, Your Grace." Lucetta turned to Gareth, after the servants withdrew a little distance. "Nerissa's companion knew about my sister's walks, which means she knew the household routine, or someone told her." Gareth watched the controlled anger return to her face. Mrs. Tamsin Vale may not have been the only person whose kindness was used. No. Lucetta touched the hourglass, then stopped herself and let her hand fall. "My sister used to sit in the small back parlour when the weather was poor. The maids kept the linen chest there because the room was warm. If someone entered when she was being taken into the garden, there would have been no one to see." Gareth heard the effort beneath her calm. It was not merely stolen paper now. It was a house she had once trusted, invaded through the habits of illness and care. "I will find Miss Braid," he said. "We will find the source," she corrected. The rebuke was quiet. He accepted it. "We will." Her eyes softened by a degree so slight he might have imagined it if he had not been watching for every mercy she gave him. "Good night, then." "Good night, Lucetta." She started toward the stairs, then paused with one hand on the banister. "The carriage," she said without turning fully. "You did not close your hand until I moved mine." Gareth felt the memory like warmth returning to a cold room. "I was afraid if I moved first, it would become another claim." It did not. She looked back then. "That is why I let it remain." No declaration could have undone him more efficiently. Before he could answer, she went upstairs, the silver hourglass resting at her throat, the sand waiting to be turned again. The following morning, the gossip sheet had already multiplied. Copies lay in breakfast rooms across Mayfair before the ink of Gareth's reply had dried. Lady Nerissa's phrase had done its work. Gentle reference, visible distress. Every cruel society understood how to turn a woman's dignity into evidence of weakness. In the study, Mr. Hulbury read the draft aloud while Lucetta stood by the window, and Gareth remained at the desk, careful not to place himself between her and the papers. Her Grace did not depart in distress. The solicitor read. The Duke and Duchess of Blackmere withdrew because the proposed subscription presumed upon the most private hopes of a marriage, and used the Duchess's name without consent. His Grace considers the matter indecent and closed. Lucetta turned from the window. Remove most private hopes. Gareth looked at her. Mr. Holbury's pen hovered. What would your Grace prefer? The most private dignity of a marriage, she said. Hope implies they are entitled to know whether I possess it. Mr. Holbury made the correction. Gareth said nothing, but his eyes rested on Lucetta with a new steadiness. She was not merely enduring the language used against her. She was reshaping the language by which she would be defended. A housemaid entered then with the morning tray and a second folded paper, this one addressed to Gareth, in a plain hand. It came through the tradesman's entrance. Your Grace. Gareth broke the seal and read. The note contained only one line, written hurriedly. Ask why Miss Braid wanted the Penrose linen calendar before the wedding. No signature. Lucetta crossed the room before she seemed to realize she had moved. May I? He handed it to her at once. She read it, and the color left her face in a slow, controlled retreat. The linen calendar, she said. Dr. Quist was right. Mr. Holbury frowned. A domestic calendar may not sound weighty before witnesses. Lucetta looked at him. Then witnesses have never understood how women are watched. The solicitor lowered his eyes. Gareth stood. We begin with Mrs. Tamsin Vale. Lucetta folded the note carefully, aligning its edges as if order could be restored by precision, and with Miss Braid. Yes. Gareth looked to Mr. Holbury. Find where Lady Nerissa's companion was before she entered Cold Harbour service. Quietly. No accusation yet. Lucetta's fingers closed around the anonymous note. No accusation, she repeated. Not until the room is full enough for truth to have witnesses. Gareth heard the promise beneath the words. The next battle would not be in a carriage, nor in a private study, nor in the tender shelter of almost trust. It would be public, it would be cruel, and this time, if he failed to stand beside her before proof became comfortable, he knew she would leave him standing alone beneath every portrait in Blackmere. The charitable art viewing was held in the west salon of Lady Mervale's house, where gilt chairs had been arranged beneath landscapes of ruined abbeys and soft Italian hills, and every ruin looked less damaged than the women smiling beneath them. By the third week of her marriage, Lucetta had learned that London did not require facts in order to assemble a verdict. It required only a room, a hostess, and enough people willing to pretend that cruelty became concern when spoken over tea. The gossip paragraph from Cold Harbour House had done its work. Morning callers now paused too long before asking after her health. Matrons lowered their voices when she entered. Young wives looked at her with that nervous pity of women relieved that another body, not theirs, had become the season's arithmetic. Gareth had answered the first insult with a formal correction, and Lady Nerissa had offered a reply so sweetly worded that no one outside the circle of harm could have called it defiance. She had merely written that she regretted any tenderness misunderstood by those made sensitive through private disappointment. Private disappointment. Lucetta had read the phrase once, folded the paper, and placed it beneath the silver hourglass pendant in her jewel case until she could bear not to burn it. She wore the pendant tonight, but the chain was loose, tied with a narrow grey ribbon, so it could not mark her again. Gareth noticed as they entered the salon. He noticed everything now that did not absolve him. It did, however, make her feel less alone in rooms designed to make her vanish. Lady Mervale has placed the subscription table by the paintings, he murmured, and Lady Nerissa is near the watercolors. Of course she is, Lucetta said. A woman looks softer beside landscapes. His mouth moved almost into a smile, then stilled when he saw what stood beyond the nearest screen. Against the far wall, between two pastoral paintings, someone had arranged an empty gilt frame upon an easel. It was not the Cold Harbor frame. This one was smaller, draped with white ribbon, and set above a table of engravings for sale. Beneath it lay a folded sheet of paper weighted by a porcelain cherub. Lucetta stopped. She did not need to read it to understand. Her body had become portable. A frame in Cold Harbor House. A frame in Lady Mervale's salon. A frame wherever society wished to gather and pretend it was not looking at her. Nerissa turned at precisely the right moment, as if surprise had been rehearsed. She wore white muslin with a single emerald at her throat, beautiful enough to make innocence seem plausible. "Duchess," she said, crossing the room, "how glad we are that you came. Lady Mervale feared you might avoid public occasions after the unfortunate misunderstanding." "Avoiding public occasions would only leave my name unattended," Lucetta replied. Nerissa's gaze flicked toward Gareth, then back to Lucetta. "How admirably brave." "You use brave very often, Lady Nerissa. I begin to suspect you mean exposed." A faint smile touched Nerissa's mouth. "I mean only that every young wife must learn to endure attention. Every young wife, or only the ones whose calendars have been circulated." The salon quieted at the edges. It was not silence yet. It was the delicate pause before a room decided whether to be shocked or entertained. Sir Otho Penrose stood near the mantel, his expression caught between alarm and anticipation. He should not have been there. He had claimed pressing business at his club when Gareth sent word forbidding private interference in Lucetta's affairs. Yet here he was, one hand tucked into his waistcoat, his eyes fixed upon the table beneath the frame. Lucetta saw him look. Gareth saw her see it. He stepped closer, not in front of her, but beside her shoulder. "Shall we leave?" he asked quietly. "Not before I know what they wished me not to see." She crossed the room before he could answer. The salon opened around her in reluctant increments. Fans lowered. Conversation thinned. At the table, she lifted the porcelain cherub and unfolded the sheet. The paper was ruled like a household chart, with dates written in a careful feminine hand and several marks circled in red. At the top, someone had written, "Concerning the health and prospects of Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackmere." The words blurred for 1 second. Not because she could not read them, because she could. Because she recognized enough of the structure to feel the old back parlor at Penrose House rise around her. Linen days, sickroom days, the quiet notations made when she had fainted after standing too long while Sir Otho's steward argued over bills. Dates kept by servants because a household needed order. Dates twisted by someone else into a map of her worth. Behind her, a woman whispered, "How dreadful!" Another answered, "One cannot blame the family for caution." Lucetta laid the sheet flat beneath the empty frame. Then she reached to her throat and untied the grey ribbon. The silver hourglass pendant slid into her palm, bright and cold. Gareth moved as if he might speak, then stopped himself. "Good," she thought, with a fierce ache. He remembered. She placed the hourglass sideways upon the table so the sand could no longer fall. The small act drew every eye more surely than a shout. "There," she said. "The house may stop counting for a moment." Nerissa's face tightened. "Duchess, that paper was not intended for display. It must have been placed there by mistake." "A mistake with a porcelain weight and a frame?" Lucetta asked. How carefully accidents dress themselves in London. Sir Otho stepped forward. "Lucetta, You embarrass yourself. Gareth's voice cut in, low and cold. You will use her title. Sir Otho's jaw worked. The Duchess embarrasses herself. The chart concerns family necessity. It is painful, yes, but pain does not make a fact indecent. No, Lucetta said, looking down at the dates. The indecency is not pain. It is the appetite with which you display it. The room had gone fully silent now. Lucetta lifted the paper, but only enough to read one line. A date in March had been circled twice. She stared at it. Then, unexpectedly, she felt the first clear crack in the lie. March 17th, London. Sick room notation. She had not been in London on March 17th. She had been in Brighton with Aunt Rosalisa, sent there because Sir Otho said sea air was cheaper than medicine and because her sister had needed the warmer back parlour to herself. Lucetta remembered the posting house, the rain. The receipt tucked in her old reticule because Aunt Rosalie had told her never to trust a man, who said a lady had not paid when she had. Lucetta looked up slowly. Gareth saw the change in her expression. Lucetta, this date is impossible. Nerissa's fan paused mid-air. Memory is unreliable under strain. Receipts are less delicate. Gareth turned sharply toward the chart. You have proof. At Dunsmore House, in my old reticule. She faced the room again. Which of you will sign your name beneath the measure of my body? No one moved. The question held them where accusation could not. It asked not whether they believed her, but whether they were willing to be seen participating in the thing done to her. Lady Mervale's cheeks coloured. A young wife lowered her eyes. An elderly baroness folded her gloves with trembling precision. Sir Otho gave a short laugh. Theatrics, very fine, but a duchess cannot silence natural concern by turning a trinket sideways. It is not natural concern, Gareth said. He picked up the chart by one corner, as if the paper itself were unclean. It is an unauthorized and indecent use of private household information. Anyone who created it, carried it, copied it, or displayed it will answer to me. Nerissa recovered enough to sigh. Your Grace, surely you don't mean to threaten an entire room because your bride is distressed. Lucetta heard the word bride and almost smiled. They remembered she was a bride only when wife gave her too much authority. I am not distressed, Lady Nerissa. I am informed. Gareth looked at her then, and for a moment the crowded room receded. His anger was visible, but so was restraint. He wanted to remove her from this place. He wanted to close his rank around her like armor. Instead, he stood beside her, holding the chart, waiting for what she chose next. That waiting steadied her more than command would have done. Lucetta picked up the sideways hourglass and returned it to her palm. Lady Mervale, your paintings are lovely. It is unfortunate that one of your tables has been used for something uglier than art. Lady Mervale opened her mouth, closed it, and curtsied because rank gave her no graceful alternative. Your Grace, I regret any offence. Then regret it aloud when asked. Lucetta turned and walked from the salon with Gareth beside her. No one tried to stop them. In the anteroom beyond, away from the eyes of the guests, but not so far that propriety vanished. The strength went out of her knees for one dangerous second. She did not fall. Gareth saw the change and stopped at once. May I offer support? He asked. The question was careful, but his voice was not cold. It was shaken. Not here, she said, her fingers closing around the pendant. Not while they watch. His hand, half lifted, lowered immediately. No wound crossed his face at the refusal. Only acceptance. Then I will stand here until you are ready to move. Lucetta looked at him. The answer cost him something. She could see that. Not pride exactly. The old instinct to act and be obeyed. Thank you. she said. It was not forgiveness. It was truth. A footman brought her cloak. Gareth did not touch her as it was placed over her shoulders. He merely took the chart, folded it once, and held it where no one else could snatch it away. At the carriage, he handed her in with formal distance. Only after they were moving did he speak, the Brighton receipt, in the small blue reticule in my dressing room. I kept it because Aunt Rosalie said proof was a woman's second spine. Your aunt sounds formidable. She was poor. Formidable was necessary. Gareth looked down at the folded chart. I should have known they would carry the matter farther. You could not know what had not yet happened. I knew enough to understand they were counting you. Lucetta watched the passing lamps slide across his face. Then understand this. I do not need you to be furious instead of me. I need you to remain steady when proof is incomplete. He looked up. I will. She wanted to believe him. That was the danger. Wanting was not trust, and trust was not yet safe. But when Dunsmore House came into view, and the carriage slowed, she did not turn the hourglass upright. She kept it sideways in her palm. The sand arrested between one chamber and the other, and for the first time, the stopped thing did not look broken. It looked like a choice. The Brighton receipt lay on Gareth's desk like a small, stubborn witness. But the lie did not retreat, simply because one date had been wounded. By noon the following day, London had found a new version of the scandal to prefer. The chart had not been false, certain ladies whispered. It had merely been indelicately displayed. The Duchess had not been wronged, others suggested. She had overreacted because the subject touched too near a private fear. A woman could be publicly measured and still be accused of vanity for objecting to the ruler. Lucetta heard none of it directly, which meant she heard all of it through the careful pauses of servants, the revised wording of notes, and the sudden abundance of flowers from women who had never before remembered she existed. White lilies from Lady Mervale, pale roses from a countess who had signed the subscription book, a basket of early strawberries from Lady Nerissa Coldharbour with a card that read, "Some sweetness after strain." Lucetta placed the card on the breakfast table beside the folded chart, the Brighton receipt, and Dr. Quist's almanac copy. She writes as if I suffered a headache at an assembly, she said. Gareth stood at the mantel, the morning fire unlit because the day was mild, his face carved into restraint. She writes as if she knows the room will protect politeness longer than it protects truth. Then the room must be made uncomfortable. It will be. She looked up. By proof, Gareth, not by wrath. I heard you the first time. I am saying it again because men often admire restraint in principle and abandon it at the first injury to pride. The words might once have stung him into coldness. Now he accepted them because he had earned her suspicion honestly. Then remind me as often as necessary. That answer drew her gaze to him, steady and searching. It was becoming dangerous. Those moments when he did not defend himself. They made it harder for her to keep him entirely among the people who had used her. A footman entered with a salver. Sir Otho Penrose requests an immediate audience, Your Grace. Gareth looked at Lucetta before answering. Will you receive him? No, she said, but I will not hide from what he brought. Gareth nodded to the footman. Show him to the study. Her Grace and I will come presently. Sir Otho was already pacing when they entered, his gloves crushed in one hand, his expression arranged into injured concern. He bowed to Gareth, then gave Lucetta the smaller, familial nod of a man who had not yet accepted that marriage had placed her beyond his management. Lucetta, this has gone far enough. Gareth's eyes lifted. Sir Otho corrected himself with visible effort. Your Grace, I speak for your own good. You usually do, Lucetta said. That is how I know danger has entered the room. Sir Otho's colour rose. You make light of ruin. You have humiliated Lady Nerissa, alarmed the dowager, and placed his Grace in a position no husband should endure 3 weeks into marriage. What position is that? Defending what should have been quietly explained. He drew a folded letter from his coat. I wished to spare you both, but since truth has been made theatrical, perhaps plain evidence will restore order. Gareth did not take the letter at once. What is it? A letter from Lucetta before the marriage. It proves she knew there were concerns and accepted the match to rescue Penrose debts regardless. Lucetta went perfectly still. The silver hourglass pendant rested at her throat, turned upright today because she had worn it before she knew this blow was coming. The sand slid down grain by grain. Gareth heard it, though it made no sound. Sir Otho held out the letter. She is not a villain, your Grace, only desperate. Her sister's cottage, her allowance, her position. Women under strain conceal what they fear will cost them security. The letter touched Gareth's hand. It bore Lucetta's name in a slanted script close enough to hers to unsettle him at once. The wax seal had been pressed neatly, perhaps too neatly. He opened it. The first line struck where Sir Otho intended it to strike. I know my prospects are uncertain, but if His Grace accepts the risk, Penrose will be saved. Gareth read the sentence once, then again. A colder part of him, older than remorse, rose from habit, the part trained by his father, sharpened by ledgers, terrified of a house cracking from within. He looked at Lucetta. Her face had lost colour, but not dignity. I did not write that, she said. Sir Otho sighed. My dear, denial will only worsen matters. Gareth should have looked first at the fold, at the seal, at the hand too careful in its imitation. He should have remembered the Brighton receipt, the chart, the almanac, the way every lie against her had dressed itself in borrowed truth. Instead, fear reached him before reason, not fear of barrenness, not even fear of scandal. Fear that he had begun to trust because he wanted to, and that wanting had made him weak. Did you know, he asked, and heard the wrongness too late. They had reason to doubt you. Lucetta did not flinch. That would have been kinder to him. She simply looked at him as if a candle had gone out in a room she had almost entered. They, she said, one word, enough to condemn him. Gareth's hand tightened around the letter. I mean, no, you meant exactly what you said. They, Sir Otho seized the opening. Your Grace, you see how carefully one must proceed. Emotion clouds her. Be silent, Gareth said, but the command came after the wound, not before it. Lucetta removed the hourglass pendant from her throat. Her fingers did not tremble. She placed it on the desk between the false letter and the Brighton receipt. Upright, the sand continued to fall. There, she said. Let it count this too. Gareth stepped toward her. Lucetta, I asked badly. You asked truly. That is worse. I do not believe him. You believed him enough to ask whether I knew they had reason. You did not ask whether the letter was false. You did not ask whether I had been trapped again. You asked whether I had been hiding the very shame they invented for me. Sir Otho drew himself up. This melodrama is precisely why discretion. Gareth turned on him with such stillness that the older man stopped. Leave this house. Sir Otho blinked. Your Grace, now but the matter, will be handled without you standing near my wife. Sir Otho's face hardened in a way Lucetta knew well. Beneath the polish, beneath the guardian's phrases, there was always the same petty authority, waiting to be obeyed. You may send me away, Your Grace, but you cannot alter facts. nor can Lucetta escape the consequences of ingratitude. Penrose Cottage is not as secure as she imagines. Lucetta's eyes lifted. For the first time since he arrived, Sir Otho had said something true enough to matter. Gareth saw it. If you threaten that cottage again, you will make yourself more useful to my solicitor than you ever were to your niece. Sir Otho bowed stiffly and left, but he took something from the room that Gareth could not call back with rank. Lucetta's near trust went with him. When the door closed, Gareth reached for the false letter again, now seeing what he should have seen before. The fold pattern did not match Penrose correspondence. The outer crease sat too high, made for a narrower envelope. The wax was familiar, but the paper had a faint scent of violet starch. Cold Harbor. Shame moved through him so quickly it left him cold. Lucetta, she lifted one hand, not dramatic, not pleading, a quiet refusal. Do not touch me. I was not going to. I know. I needed to say it before I wished you would. That hurt more than anger. She picked up the pendant and held it in her palm. You may investigate my calendar. You may not inherit my silence. I know I have no right to ask you to stay. Then do not. The room seemed to contract around the words. Gareth looked at the woman he had married to preserve a line, and had nearly lost because he had not yet learned how to preserve a trust. Where will you go? Penrose Cottage. With Mrs. Aldera's companion, if she is willing. My sister is there, and Sir Otho has reminded me that his hand still reaches toward her roof. I can send guards. Her face closed. No. He forced himself to stop. Protection without permission would only repeat the wound in a cleaner coat. Mrs. Alder, then, and a carriage, if you allow it. A carriage is not forgiveness. I know. Good. She moved toward the door, then paused. When you find proof, ask yourself whether you wanted truth because it cleared me, or because it relieved you. He had no answer. She left him with that silence. Within the hour, Lucetta departed Dunsmore House in a closed carriage with Mrs. Alder beside her, and one maid following with a modest trunk. The servants did not stare, because fear of Gareth had made them disciplined and pity had made them kind. Gareth watched from the study window without showing himself. He had arranged for a second carriage to follow at a distance, not as a guard pressed upon her, but as protection against Sir Otho's interference, with instructions that no one approach unless Mrs. Alder requested aid. It was the thinnest line between care and control, and he hated that he had made such lines necessary. When the carriage turned out of the square, Gareth returned to the desk. The hourglass was gone. The false letter remained. He laid it beside Nerissa's card from the first morning call, then beside the folded note from Cold Harbour's subscription. Same faint violet starch, same narrow fold, same elegant cruelty hiding in paper. By dusk, London would say the Duchess of Blackmere had fled because the accusations were true. Gareth looked at the empty place where Lucetta had stood and understood that proof could still save her name. It might not save him. Penrose Cottage looked smaller than Lucetta remembered, but kinder. It stood beyond Richmond, where London's polished cruelty thinned into hedgerows, damp lanes, and gardens that had never learned how to flatter rank. The cottage was not grand. Its brick had weathered unevenly. The front gate leaned after years of economical repairs, and the little parlour smelled faintly of lavender, coal ash, and the orange peel her younger sister liked to dry near the hearth. Yet when Lucetta stepped inside with Mrs. Alder behind her and the modest trunk carried by the groom, she felt the first clean breath she had taken since the wedding morning. No portraits watched from the walls, no empty frame waited for a son, No one asked what her body owed. Her sister, Miss Amabel Penrose, rose too quickly from the sofa and nearly overturned her embroidery basket. Lucetta. The name broke on relief. Amabel was 21, fairer than Lucetta, slighter, with the translucent look left by long illness and too many winters spent in rooms kept warm only when money allowed. Lucetta crossed the parlor and took both her hands. She had meant to be strong. She had meant to arrive as the Duchess of Blackmere, composed and untouchable. Instead, she bent her forehead briefly to Amabel's knuckles and let the old love steady her. "I'm here," she said, "only for a little while." Amabel looked past her toward the door, anxiety gathering. "Has he sent you away?" "No," Lucetta straightened. "I came because I chose to." Mrs. Alder, tactful and grey-haired, directed the maid with the trunk, asked quietly after tea, and made herself useful in the way of women who understood that dignity often needed practical assistance before poetry. Lucetta removed her bonnet and gloves. The silver hourglass pendant lay in her reticule, not at her throat. She had taken it off before leaving Dunsmore House, placed it in her palm in the carriage, and refused to let it dictate whether she trembled. Amabel touched the back of the sofa. Sir Otho came yesterday. Lucetta's breath paused. "Here, only to the gate. Mrs. Finch told him I was resting. He said resting was becoming an expensive habit among Penrose women." A thin line of anger moved through Lucetta, cold and clarifying. "He will not speak to you like that again." Amabel gave a small, sad smile. "You sound like a duchess." "No, I sound like your sister." By afternoon, the cottage had settled around her departure from Dunsmore House with less drama than London would have preferred. Mrs. Finch, the old housekeeper, brought tea strong enough to mend nerves. Amabel produced the little japanned box where she had saved stray receipts because Lucetta had once taught her that paper remembered what people denied. There, beneath seed invoices and a ribbon bill, lay the Brighton posting receipt. Lucetta set it beside the copied chart Gareth had allowed her to take before she left. The false date glared upward. March 17th, London. The receipt said Brighton, paid in full, with Aunt Rosalie's bold note on the back. "Never let a gentleman misplace your proof." "There," Amabel whispered. "That is something, is it not? It is a beginning." Lucetta folded the receipt carefully and placed it in her writing case. "But not enough. We need Mrs. Tamsin Vale." Amabel looked down at her embroidery. "She was kind to us." "I know. Then why would she give anyone the calendar?" "Kind women are often told they are helping when they are being used." Amabel's needle paused. There was a lady's companion once. Not Lady Nerissa herself. A narrow woman with pale hair. She came when you were walking with Aunt Rosalie before Brighton. Sir Otho said she had brought a message about some charity linen. Mrs. Vale seemed troubled afterward. Lucetta looked up. "Miss Braid?" "I think so." She praised Mrs. Vale for being loyal to the family. "I remember because Mrs. Vale cried in the pantry and said loyalty should not feel like theft." The words entered Lucetta with a quiet force. The chain was becoming visible now. Not whole, but enough to follow. "Would you swear to that if asked?" Amabel paled. "Before people, only if you choose. I will not spend your courage for my rescue." "You never spent anything of mine." Amabel's voice trembled, but she lifted her chin. "Everyone spent yours." Lucetta reached across the table and covered her sister's hand. "Not any more." The knock came near dusk, when the cottage windows had darkened to mirrors and Mrs. Alder had begun to worry aloud about the road from London. Mrs. Finch answered it, then appeared at the parlor door with an expression so carefully neutral that Lucetta knew before she spoke. "His Grace is at the gate, my lady. He asks whether her Grace will receive a note. He says he will not come beyond the gate without permission." Amabel's eyes widened. Mrs. Alder looked at Lucetta and said nothing. Lucetta stood. Her first feeling was not anger. That disturbed her. Anger would have been safer. Instead, she felt the ache of seeing him understand at last where the threshold stood. "I will go to the door," she said. "Not the gate?" Amabel asked. "No. If he came to learn permission, I will not make him shout through a hedge." She found Gareth standing beyond the small garden path, hat in hand, his carriage drawn up behind him, the ducal crest muted by road dust. He looked too large for the humble lane and too still for a man accustomed to being admitted everywhere. The sight should have satisfied her. It did not. His face held no indignation, no husbandly injury, no assumption that apology guaranteed entry. Only exhaustion and remorse disciplined into patience. He bowed, not the slight inclination he gave to drawing rooms. A real beau. "Lucetta." She remained on the threshold. "Your Grace." He accepted the title like a deserved distance. "I brought the letter Sir Otho gave me, the Cold Harbour card, and the fold comparison. I also brought a memorandum from Mr. Holbury regarding the cottage tenancy. I will leave them with Mrs. Alder if you prefer. Is the memorandum another protection I did not authorize?" He looked down once, then back. "It was nearly that. I had Mr. Holbury draft a trust arrangement to prevent Sir Otho from disturbing Amabel's residence. I was going to sign it before telling you. Then I heard your voice in my head and realized I had put velvet on the same old command." The plainness of the confession unsettled her more than excuses would have done. "And now it is unsigned." He held out the folded paper, not stepping closer. "It is yours to read, alter, refuse, or burn." The small garden smelled of wet earth and boxwood. Somewhere inside, Amabel moved away from the window quickly enough to prove she had been watching. Lucetta took the paper. Their fingers did not touch. "That is not why you came." "No," the word was rough. "I came to say what I should have said before you left. I was wrong. Not vaguely, not unfortunately wrong. I repeated the first cruelty of our marriage when I asked whether they had reason to doubt you. I made your body stand trial again, because fear spoke before trust. I asked the question Sir Otho wanted me to ask. I am ashamed of it." Lucetta's hand tightened around the memorandum. She had imagined this moment in harsher colors. She had thought she would answer with a sentence sharp enough to make him bleed in return. But his apology did not ask for comfort. It did not lean upon her kindness. It stood there, exposed and unattractive, as real remorse often was. "Why did you ask it?" Gareth looked toward the darkening hedge, then back to her. "Because I wanted the proof to be clean before I let myself believe what I already knew of you. Because wanting to trust you frightened me. Because if you had deceived me, I could have returned to being only a duke with a problem. Instead, I am a husband who wounded his wife." Silence opened between them. A carriage passed at the far end of the lane, then disappeared. Lucetta felt tired suddenly, not weak, but tired of being defended by documents and damaged by questions. "I will return to Dunsmore House only when the lie is corrected publicly," she said. "Not softened, not privately managed, publicly corrected. Yes, and I will not stand behind you while it is done. No, beside me, or before me if you choose. Do not be noble because you are ashamed." "I am not noble," his voice lowered. "I'm trying to become honest before I lose the right to stand near you." The sentence reached her before she could guard against it. Not as seduction, not even as romance, as truth. She stepped out from the threshold onto the path. Gareth did not move toward her. That restraint undid the last of her anger's sharp edge. She walked the few steps herself and stopped before him. "You nearly said something in the cottage memorandum, did you not? That I wished you home?" No, her gaze held his. "Something more dangerous." His throat worked once. "Yes, do not say it yet. I know. Truth first, he said. The wind moved through the hedge, cool and carrying the first scent of rain. Lucetta looked at the man who had failed her, and at the man now standing still enough to let her choose whether his failure was the end of them. Then, because the choice was hers, she stepped closer and rested her forehead against his chest. Gareth's breath stopped. He did not lift his arms. For one aching second, he remained motionless, waiting. Lucetta placed both hands lightly against his coat. Only then did his arms come around her, careful, restrained, barely holding, and yet sheltering enough that her eyes closed. It was not forgiveness. It was not surrender. It was the first embrace neither duty nor fear had arranged for them. "Come beside me when truth costs you," she whispered, "then ask me home." Gareth's voice came low above her, unsteady in a way no drawing room would have recognized. "I will." From inside the cottage, Amabel did not call out. "Mrs." Alder did not interrupt. The lane held its breath around them until Lucetta drew back first. Gareth let her go at once. By the time his carriage returned to London, he carried the signed permission to have Mr. Halbury prepare the cottage trust under Lucetta's approval, the Brighton receipt copied for evidence, and Amabel's recollection written in a careful hand. Lucetta stood at the cottage door until the lamps vanished. Then Mrs. Finch brought another note from the kitchen passage, delivered by a boy who had refused to give his name. Lucetta opened it under the parlour lamp. The writing was cramped and frightened. "Mrs. Tamsin Vale will speak if her grace promises Sir Otho cannot send her son from his place." Lucetta folded the note and pressed it flat beside the hourglass pendant. At last, one of the women who had been used by the lie was ready to become a witness to the truth. Mrs. Tamsin Vale came to Dunsmore House through the servants' entrance, because fear had taught her to choose smaller doors. Gareth did not allow her to remain there. By Lucetta's instruction, and with Mrs. Alder beside her as witness, the former maid was brought not into the kitchen, nor into the housekeeper's room, but into the small library off the long gallery, where a coal fire burned low, and Mr. Halbury had arranged the papers in separate stacks. The Brighton receipt lay beneath a glass weight. The false chart sat folded beside Dr. Quist's copied almanac entry. Sir Otho's forged letter rested apart from the others, because Gareth could not look at it without remembering the question that had driven Lucetta from his house. Lucetta arrived from Penrose Cottage shortly after noon, wearing a dark blue travelling gown and the silver hourglass pendant tucked against her bodice on its grey ribbon. She had chosen to come. That mattered more than any carriage sent for her. Gareth met her at the library door and did not step into her path. "Mrs. Vale is waiting," he said. "Mr. Halbury has given written assurance regarding her son's place, but nothing has been signed without your approval." Lucetta looked at him for one measured second. "Show it to her first, not me. Fear listens better when it sees its own name protected." He bowed his head. "Yes." Mrs. Vale rose when Lucetta entered, twisting a clean handkerchief between work-ruined fingers. She was not old, though worry had pulled her face downward at the mouth and eyes. Her black dress was neat, her bonnet plain, and her first curtsy was so deep that Lucetta crossed the room before it could become humiliation. Please don't do that to me, Mrs. Vale. The woman froze. Your Grace, you were kind to me when kindness was inconvenient. Sit as a witness, not as a culprit. Mrs. Vale's eyes filled at once, but she sat. Gareth remained near the mantel. Mr. Holbury opened his notebook. Mrs. Alder took the chair nearest the door, guardian of propriety, and, by her expression, of any woman who might be made small in the room. Lucetta placed the hourglass pendant on the table, not upright, not sideways yet, simply present. Tell us what happened, Mrs. Vale looked at the pendant as if it were a bell that had summoned truth. I kept the linen calendar after your father died, Your Grace. You were faint so often then. Mrs. Finch asked me to note which days you took broth, which days the sheets required changing, which days you walked or did not walk. It was household care, nothing more. I know. Lucetta's voice was low. I never thought you did it cruelly. Mrs. Vale pressed the handkerchief to her mouth, gathered herself, and continued. Miss Braid came first. She said, Lady Nerissa Coldharbour had heard Sir Otho was anxious for your reputation. She said, ladies sometimes suffer if records aren't orderly before a marriage. I told her such papers were not for strangers. Then Sir Otho said I was obstructing family prudence. He said, my son's place with the Penrose steward could vanish if I fancied myself too grand to obey. Gareth's face hardened. Lucetta saw it, and, without looking away from Mrs. Vale, said, he inhaled once. I am. Mrs. Vale glanced between them. Something in that exchange seemed to give her courage. I copied the dates, not all, only what they asked for. Days of fainting. Days you did not come down. Days linen was sent to the sick room. I thought they meant to protect you from gossip. Miss Braid said if the Duke knew you needed rest, he might be gentle. Lucetta's hand tightened on the table edge. Gentleness purchased by surveillance is not gentleness. No, Your Grace. Mrs. Vale's voice broke. I know that now. Mr. Holbury slid the false chart forward. Did you write this? She recoiled. No, those are not my headings. The dates have been moved. This one here, March 17th. I never marked London. Her Grace was in Brighton. Mrs. Finch had the linen that week because I was sent to inventory the upper cupboards. Lucetta looked at Gareth. The Brighton receipt had become more than a contradiction now. It was a hinge. Can you swear to that? Gareth asked. Mrs. Vale straightened. Before God and any magistrate his Grace pleases. Mr. Holbury wrote quickly. And Miss Braid? She took the copy in a grey reticule with a silver clasp. I saw Lady Nerissa's card tucked inside it. Coldharbour House. I remember because the C and H were twisted like vines. Gareth moved to the packet of notes and withdrew Nerissa's first visiting card, then the folded invitation to the portrait subscription. Mrs. Vale nodded before he spoke. That hand. Not the writing of the chart, maybe, but the note that came with Miss Braid. The same long C. Lucetta reached for the false chart. Gareth's hand moved at the same moment to steady the paper before it slid from the table, then stopped, remembering. May I? He asked. The question was small, but the room heard it. Lucetta's gaze lifted to his. Some memory passed between them. The study, the ledger, the first permitted touch that had not demanded more. Yes. He placed his hand flat beside hers, anchoring the papers without covering her fingers. She did not move away. Their gloves almost touched. Almost was enough. The nearness held for one breath, then another. Not a caress, not even comfort, but partnership made visible. Mr. Holbury looked down at his notes with admirable urgency. Mrs. Vale pretended not to notice. Lucetta's voice remained steady. No romance before truth, Gareth. It was not a rebuke. It was a warning to them both. His eyes softened with pain, and something warmer that he did not ask her to name. "After truth," he said. She drew her hand back first, but gently. That gentleness remained in the air after the touch ended. Dr. Quist arrived half an hour later, carrying his original almanac under his arm and a written statement wrapped in brown paper. He confirmed every essential point. His notes described anemia, grief, exhaustion, irregular weakness, and the need for rest. He had never written that Lucetta was barren. He had never authorized a reproductive chart. He had never advised public scrutiny, delayed settlement penalties, or any conclusion about children. The phrase medical caution, he said with visible distaste, was lifted from a sentence concerning nourishment and fatigue. Lucetta sat very still. So a recommendation that I be fed and allowed to recover became a rumor that I was unfit to be a wife. Dr. Quist's shame was plain. "Yes, Your Grace." Gareth's voice turned dangerously quiet, and Sir Otho requested confirmation of that distortion. He requested language he could use. I refused. I see now that refusal was not enough. "No," Lucetta said. The word surprised everyone. It was not. But testimony may yet do what caution did not. By dusk, the proof had arranged itself into a chain no polite lie could easily break. Mrs. Vale's linen calendar, Dr. Quist's almanac, the Brighton receipt, the false chart, the Cold Harbour card, the forged letter with its narrow fold and violet starch. Mr. Holbury copied statements, sealed packets, and wrote names with a solicitor's careful relish. Gareth sent instructions that Mrs. Vale's son was to be protected from Penrose influence under a temporary Dunsmore guarantee until Lucetta approved final terms. Mrs. Vale wept when Lucetta told her, not loudly, but into the same handkerchief she'd had twisted nearly to threads. "I don't deserve such mercy." Lucetta touched the table, not the woman, allowing dignity to remain intact. It is not mercy to prevent someone from being punished for telling the truth. When Mrs. Vale and Dr. Quist had gone, Lucetta remained in the library with Gareth, Mrs. Alder discreetly near the outer door. The house beyond was quiet. Through the open library door, the long gallery stretched in dimness, and the empty frame at its far end seemed to wait with less certainty than before. "Nerissa will not stop," Lucetta said. "She cannot. Too many of her fingerprints are now on the lie." Gareth held out a note delivered that afternoon, sealed with Cold Harbour wax. "She has announced a formal gathering here tomorrow evening. A restoration of confidence in the Blackmere line." Lucetta read it once. A strange calm settled over her. Good. Good. She wishes a room full enough for performance. I require a room full enough for correction. Gareth looked toward the gallery. Then it happens under the frame. Yes. Lucetta lifted the hourglass pendant from the table and turned it sideways in her palm, where I was first measured. For one suspended moment, he looked as if he might cross the small space between them. She wanted him to. That was why she raised one hand and touched his sleeve instead, a brief pressure, chosen and restrained. His breath changed. Hers did too. "After truth," she said again, softer now. "After truth," he answered. The words were no longer denial. They were promise. The long gallery had never held so many living witnesses beneath so many painted dead. By 8 o'clock, Dunsmore House was full of restrained movement, candlelight, and the kind of silence that did not come from peace. It came from expectation. Footmen stood along the walls with faces trained into stillness. Mr. Holbury had placed a long table beneath the empty gilt frame, and upon it he had arranged the evidence in measured order. The Blackmere Heir ledger, the separate rider, the false chart, the Brighton posting receipt, Dr. Quist's almanac, Mrs. Tamsin Vale's copied linen calendar, the forged letter, and the folded Cold Harbor stationery with its faint violet scent. The silver hourglass pendant was not yet on the table. Lucetta held it in her gloved hand as she waited beyond the gallery doors with Mrs. Alder beside her. Its sand rested in one bulb, obedient only because she had not turned it. On the other side of the doors, guests gathered under the pretense of preserving confidence in the Blackmere line. The Dowager Duchess had taken her chair near the second portrait. Pale with outrage held in rigid discipline, Lady Nerissa Cold Harbor stood beneath a painted Duchess who had died 2 centuries earlier after producing 5 sons, as though Nerissa meant to borrow virtue from a corpse. Sir Otho Penrose remained near the solicitor's table, his chin high, one hand at his waistcoat, his eyes too bright. Dr. Abel Quist had arrived with his almanac under his arm. Mrs. Tamsin Vale waited in the adjoining library, trembling but present, protected by Gareth's word and Lucetta's insistence. Gareth stood alone at the center of the gallery when the first murmurs thinned. He did not look toward the door where Lucetta waited. He had asked whether she wished him to enter with her. She had answered, "No, I was brought here once as an object. Tonight I will enter as myself." So he waited where she had placed him, not ahead, not behind. Beside the place, she would claim. Lady Nerissa's voice, sweet and carrying, rose before he could speak. "Your Grace, we are all grateful that you have permitted a private gathering to restore calm. No one wishes to distress the Duchess. We only hope to end speculation before it injures the dignity of House Dunsmore further." Gareth looked at her for one cold second. The dignity of House Dunsmore was injured before any speculation began. Sir Otho gave a sharp little laugh. A generous husband may say so, but generosity must not make a duke blind to prudence. The doors opened then. Lucetta entered alone. Conversation ceased with such suddenness that the candles seemed louder. She wore deep grey silk, simple enough to deny spectacle and fine enough that no one could mistake her rank. The hourglass pendant lay in her palm, its chain looped loosely around her fingers. She did not look at Sir Otho first, nor at Nerissa, nor even at Gareth. She looked at the empty frame. Then she walked the length of the gallery, beneath the painted dukes, and placed the hourglass sideways at the center of the table, directly below the waiting gilt. The sand stopped before it could begin to fall. Only after that did she turn. "You invited witnesses," she said. "Thank you." Lady Nerissa's fan opened with a whisper. "Dear Duchess, no one is on trial." "Then why?" Lucetta asked. "Has my body been given evidence?" A stir moved through the room. Gareth stepped to her side. He did not take her hand. He did not speak over her. He stood close enough that no one could pretend she stood unprotected, and far enough that no one could say she had been hidden behind him. Sir Otho's face hardened. "This is theatrical nonsense. The concern is simple. The Duchess entered marriage knowing there were questions. I have acted only to protect the family from concealment." Gareth's voice came low. "No, before any paper is read, before any witness speaks, and before any blame is placed upon those who built upon my first error, I will name that error myself." The room froze around him. The dowager's head turned sharply. Nerissa's smile faltered. Lucetta looked at him then. Gareth faced the guests, but his words belonged first to her. "On the day of my marriage, in this gallery, under that empty frame, I told my wife she was here to produce an heir, and nothing more. The first wrong was mine. I made her stand beneath an absence and called it duty. I allowed the language of inheritance to become more important than the woman I had married. Whatever followed found ground because I had already made the soil cruel. No one moved. It was one thing for a duke to expose a guardian, a rival, or a foolish hostess. It was another for him to indict himself before the class that depended upon men never doing so. The dowager's fingers tightened on her fan until the sticks creaked. Sir Otho recovered first. A touching speech, your grace, but sentiment cannot alter facts. No, Lucetta said. That is why we brought facts. Mr. Holbury opened the ledger. His voice was clear, dry, and mercilessly calm. The original marriage settlement draft contained no rider concerning issue within 3 years. The rider appears only in the final version, delivered under urgency by Sir Otho Penrose's representative. Beside the heir clause appears a marginal notation in a hand not belonging to my office. He placed Nerissa's visiting card beside the page. The room leaned without appearing to lean. The same initial form appears here. Nerissa gave a soft laugh. Initials are poor proof, Mr. Holbury. There must be many ladies with an N and a C in London. Indeed, Lucetta said, but not all of them hosted a subscription for a child not yet conceived. A few eyes dropped. The memory of Coldharbour House could not be denied because too many of the room had attended it. Dr. Quist stepped forward next, pale but steady. I examined Lady Lucetta Penrose after her father's death, before she became Duchess of Blackmere. My notes refer to anemia, exhaustion, poor nourishment, and grief. I wrote that care and rest were advisable. I did not write that her grace was barren. I did not write that she was unfit for marriage. I did not authorize a reproductive chart, nor did I advise public concern. Sir Otho's jaw tightened. A physician often softens delicate truths for ladies. Dr. Quist turned to him. A gentleman often hardens them when he needs leverage. A shocked breath moved across the gallery. Lucetta felt Gareth shift beside her, not with rage, but with contained satisfaction. The doctor opened his almanac. The dates cited in the false chart do not match my notes. One key date places Her Grace in London under sick-room observation. The Brighton posting receipt proves she was not in London at all. Mr. Holbury placed the receipt beside the chart. Lucetta looked at the small paper and thought of Aunt Rosalie's firm handwriting, of poverty made vigilant, of proof kept because women learned early that truth needed witnesses before men respected it. Nerissa's fan had stopped moving. A single mistaken date hardly proves malice. Then let us not rely upon one, Gareth said. Mrs. Tamsin Vale will speak. Sir Otho stepped forward. A dismissed maid. Your Grace, surely you won't place a servant's confusion against family honour. Gareth turned so swiftly that Sir Otho stopped within 2 paces of Lucetta. You will not approach the Duchess. The words were quiet enough to be more dangerous than anger. And you will not teach this room that family honour means frightening women beneath your rank. Sir Otho halted. Lucetta felt Gareth's hand near hers then, not touching, only present. This time she chose before the room could choose for her. She reached down and took his hand. His fingers remained open for the first second, stunned by the public gift of it. Then he closed them gently around hers, not as claim, but as answer. The gallery saw, the dowager saw, Nerissa saw, and her face lost the last of its borrowed innocence. Lucetta did not look away. Mrs. Vale may enter, she said. Gareth's thumb did not move over her glove. There was no caress for the room to consume, no display to soften the reckoning into romance. Yet his hand held steady in hers, warm and real beneath the empty frame where she had first been measured. Mrs. Tamsin Vale came through the library door, small, pale, and shaking. But she did not curtsy herself to the floor this time. She held the linen calendar in both hands. Lucetta saw her fear and lifted the hand joined with Gareth's just enough for the room to understand that the witness was protected by them both. Mrs. Vale swallowed. I copied dates for Miss Braid because Sir Otho Penrose said it was family prudence and because I feared for my son's place. Those dates were later rearranged. Her Grace was not in London on March 17th. The chart is false. Sir Otho began, "You ungrateful." "Enough," Gareth said. The single word struck the gallery wall and returned colder. Mrs. Vale opened the calendar to the marked page. Miss Braid took the copy in a grey reticule. Lady Nerissa Coldharbour's card was inside it. Nerissa's chin lifted. Servants imagine grandeur into every scrap they see. Lucetta looked at her, still holding Gareth's hand. And ladies imagine they can make servants invisible after using their eyes. For the first time, Lady Nerissa had no immediate reply. Mr. Hulbury placed the forged letter beside the Coldharbour card. There remains the matter of the letter presented by Sir Otho Penrose. The fold pattern does not match Penrose correspondence. It matches Coldharbour notepaper. The starch and paper width are consistent with Lady Nerissa's invitation to the portrait subscription. The gallery waited. The old portraits watched. Beneath the empty frame, the hourglass lay sideways, refusing its old obedience. Gareth's hand tightened once around Lucetta's, not to restrain her, but as if to tell her he would stand where truth was about to cost him. Lucetta turned to the room that had come expecting to inspect her, and saw, at last, the first fear move in the faces of those who had counted her. "Now," she said, "we will discuss who taught London to call theft concern." Lucetta did not raise her voice, and that was why every person in the long gallery heard her. The question remained under the empty frame like a drawn line no one could cross without declaring themselves. Who had taught London to call theft concern? Lady Nerissa Coldharbour's fan moved once, then stopped. Sir Otho Penrose looked toward the doors, perhaps measuring the distance to escape against the humiliation of being seen to flee. The Dowager Duchess sat rigid, her face pale beneath the diamonds at her throat. Gareth stood beside Lucetta with her hand still in his. And for the first time since their marriage, the joining did not feel like a concession to custom. It felt like a chosen witness. Mr. Hulbury adjusted his spectacles and opened the packet containing the forged letter. The letter presented by Sir Otho Penrose claims Her Grace acknowledged private uncertainty before the marriage and accepted the union to rescue Penrose finances. The hand imitates Her Grace's, but the pressure differs at every descending stroke. More important, the sheet was folded for a narrower envelope than Penrose House uses. It matches Lady Nerissa Coldharbour's private notepaper. Nerissa gave a soft laugh, but it no longer sounded effortless. A solicitor may make poetry of stationery if paid handsomely enough. Then perhaps the stationer may be less poetic, Gareth said. A clerk stepped from near the library door, thin and nervous, carrying a brown ledger. Nerissa's colour changed. Not enough for a stranger. Enough for Lucetta. The clerk bowed. "I am Mr. Anstey, assistant to Lowndes and Firth, stationers in Bond Street. We supplied Lady Nerissa Coldharbour with narrow violet-starched notepaper in March and April. We also cut several sheets to match a sample she brought, saying she wished to imitate an older family hand for a private entertainment." A murmur passed through the room. Nerissa's eyes flashed. "You mistake me. It was for a charade." Lucetta looked at her. "It was." The simplicity of the answer silenced the nearest whisper. Mr. Hulbury placed the Coldharbour invitation beside the forged letter. The paper, fold, and starch correspond. The false chart was delivered after the same period. Mrs. Vale's copied calendar was taken by Miss Braid, Lady Nerissa's companion, who carried a Cold Harbour card. Companions run errands, Nerissa said. They also misunderstand them. Mrs. Tamsin Vale, still pale but steadier now, lifted her chin. Miss Braid said, Lady Nerissa wanted the dates arranged clearly, because gentlemen don't understand women's ailments unless a lady explains them. Nerissa turned on her. You were paid for household work, not for interpreting your betters. Gareth's voice cut through the gallery. She is interpreting the truth. That outranks you tonight. The words landed with visible force. A duke could insult gently and ruin thoroughly. Nerissa felt both. Sir Otho stepped in, desperation sharpening him. Even if Lady Nerissa's companion was indiscreet, that does not alter the essential prudence. I had debts, yes. Most families do. I sought security for my niece and for her sister. If the Duke wished certainty, was I wrong to provide what information existed? Lucetta turned toward him at last. You did not provide information. You sold suspicion. I protected Penrose. No, you protected yourself from creditors and called it family. Mr. Holbury opened the separate rider and laid it beside the Blackmere Heir ledger. Sir Otho's debts are attached, here, here, and here, under the altered rider, if no issue appeared within 3 years. Certain Penrose obligations shifted against her Grace's portion, while Sir Otho retained influence over the cottage arrangements and delayed repayment demands. Her supposed uncertainty was financially useful to him. Sir Otho's face blotched. A guardian may negotiate practical terms. A guardian may not negotiate with a lie against the woman he is sworn to protect, Gareth said. Dr. Quist stepped forward, his almanac open. My original note reads, Lady Lucetta Penrose suffers from exhaustion, poor nourishment, grief and anemia. Rest and care advised. No conclusion can or should be drawn regarding future childbearing. He looked toward the guests with quiet disgust. That sentence was cut apart. Care became caution. Rest became risk. A request that she be treated gently became permission to treat her as defective. The word defective moved through the gallery like smoke. Lucetta felt Gareth's hand tighten once, then loosen again, giving her the power to remain or withdraw. She remained. The Brighton posting receipt was set beneath the false chart. The impossible March date collapsed under the plainness of ink and payment. Mrs. Vale's linen calendar showed the original entry. Dr. Quist's almanac corrected the medical lie. The stationer's ledger tied Nerissa to the paper. The settlement rider tied Sir Otho to profit. One by one, the room lost every refuge except shame. Nerissa's composure cracked first. Sir Otho told me she knew, she said, too quickly. He said the Duke deserved warning. I merely wished to prevent House Dunsmore from being trapped. Sir Otho swung toward her. You designed the subscription. You wanted her laughed out of the position you coveted. And you wanted her frightened enough to keep your debts hidden. The words tore from Nerissa before she could swallow them. The gallery heard. So did the dowager, whose face changed not with pity, but with the terrible recognition that bloodline pride had made her useful to smaller villains. Lucetta released Gareth's hand then, not from rejection, but because she needed both hands free. She picked up the silver hourglass and turned it sideways again beneath the empty frame. I was never empty, she said. You were taught to count where you should have loved. You counted days, symptoms, silences, meals missed, rooms entered, sheets changed, months not yet lived. You counted everything except the woman standing before you. No one answered. There was no answer clean enough. Gareth stepped forward, but only to stand beside the table, not before her. Sir Otho Penrose will have no further authority over her Grace's portion, correspondence, household access, or the cottage where Miss Amabel Penrose resides. Mr. Holbury will prepare the necessary protections tonight. Any creditor seeking Sir Otho may do so without touching the Duchess of Blackmere or her sister. Sir Otho stared at him. You would ruin me? No, Gareth said. You arranged that with admirable industry. A few guests looked down to hide their reaction. Gareth turned to Nerissa. House Dunsmore withdraws all patronage from Lady Nerissa Cold Harbour. No Dunsmore invitation, subscription, recommendation, carriage place, committee seat, or house introduction will carry your name again. You will also dismiss Miss Braid with a character that states only the truth, and Mr. Holbury will review it before it leaves your hand. Nerissa's lips parted. You cannot command every door in London. No, but I can close mine loudly enough that others will ask why. The dowager rose slowly. The room seemed to brace for defense, denial, another polished cruelty. Instead, she looked at Lucetta. I gave you that hourglass as a command. The words cost her. Not enough to heal, enough to matter. I was wrong. Lucetta inclined her head. Yes, Your Grace. You were. The dowager flinched but accepted it. The gathering dissolved not with drama but with the quieter violence of consequence. Guests withdrew in clusters, carrying corrected knowledge out into the city that had feasted on the lie. Sir Otho, left under Mr. Holbury's supervision, already demanding private conversation and receiving none. Nerissa departed last, white-faced and unsmiling, the beauty of her composure gone brittle beyond repair. When the final carriage rolled away and the long gallery emptied, Lucetta remained beneath the frame. Gareth stood several paces from her, as if distance were the last apology he could offer. You are free of the lie, he said. That is not the same as being free of what it cost. No, his voice roughened. It isn't. She turned to him. The candles had burned lower. The portraits looked less powerful now, merely old. You said the first wrong was yours, because it was. And if I had chosen not to return, his face tightened, but he did not look away. Then I would have corrected the public wrong and lived with the private one. The answer passed through her, quiet and deep. He did not ask for reward. He did not ask to be forgiven because he had done what decency required. Lucetta stepped closer. Gareth. His breath changed at the sound of his name. Yes, you may ask now, he understood. The emotion in his face broke restraint without destroying it. May I kiss you? Lucetta lifted her hand and touched his cheek first, her gloved fingers resting lightly against the line of his jaw. Yes, she said, because I choose it. He bent slowly, giving her every moment to withdraw. She did not. The kiss was gentle, brief, and trembling, with all they had refused to steal from truth. When he drew back, his eyes were wet. This time she saw. I love you, Lucetta, he said, not for an heir, not for the name, for yourself. Her own tears rose, but they did not shame her. I love you, Gareth, but I will never again be loved as a duty. He closed his eyes as if the mercy of that answer hurt. Then I will spend my life loving you as a choice. Lucetta looked up at the empty frame. Remove it before I return to Blackmere Abbey. It will be gone before you arrive. She turned the hourglass sideways in his palm. Then let the house learn to wait for happiness, not a child. Blackmere Abbey had changed before Lucetta arrived, but not in the way guests would have noticed first. The towers still rose from the Kentish slope with their old grey confidence. The long drive still curved between beeches and meadow grass silvered by late summer light. The servants still stood in ordered lines upon the steps, and the housekeeper still held the keys with the solemnity of a woman presenting a kingdom. Yet the change was waiting inside, beyond the hall, past the staircase, in the long gallery where generations of Dunsmore men had once watched the living measure themselves against the dead. The empty frame was gone. In its place hung a landscape of Blackmere Abbey in spring, not grandly heroic, not crowded with heirs, but full of ordinary life. Tenants crossed a distant field. A gardener bent near the glass house. A child from the village chased a hoop along the lower path, small enough to be almost missed unless one looked carefully. There was no cradle in the painting, no coronet placed above a son not yet born, no blank space demanding that Lucetta fill it. She stood before it in a travelling gown of deep green, the silver hourglass pendant tied sideways on a grey ribbon at her throat, so the sand rested uselessly against the glass and could not fall. For a moment, the household waited behind her. Gareth stood at her left, not touching, though she felt the full discipline of his stillness. The Dowager Duchess, older in spirit than she had been 3 months before, sat near the window with her cane across her lap and no command ready on her tongue. Mr. Halberry's corrected memoranda had travelled faster than gossip, because Gareth had made certain they did. Sir Otho Penrose no longer controlled Lucetta's portion, her correspondence, or Penrose Cottage. His creditors had found him with an appetite sharpened by public disgrace, and no Dunsmore door had opened to soften their arrival. Lady Nerissa Coldharbour had discovered that beauty without welcome was only another mirror. Invitations had thinned, committees had misplaced her name. Even those who once laughed beneath her empty frames now spoke of unfortunate overreach, which was society's timid word for cruelty caught in daylight. Mrs. Tamsin Vale's son had kept his place, protected under terms Lucetta had read and altered herself. Dr. Quist's corrected statement rested with the solicitor. Amabel Penrose had come to Blackmere for the autumn, not as a dependent hidden in the back parlour, but as the Duchess's sister, given the sunny south room and enough peace to become young again. All this had been done. Still, Lucetta knew better than to trust reform that existed only on paper. She turned from the painting and faced the assembled household. "This gallery will remain open," she said, "not as a shrine to sons, nor as a passage where women learn to walk beneath expectation. It will be used for music on Thursdays, parish sewing on wet afternoons, and any child of the estate who wishes to see where the house keeps its history. History should not be allowed to frighten people who are still alive." A ripple passed through the servants, quickly contained. The old housekeeper, Mrs. Denby, looked at Gareth as if asking whether this new order had ducal weight. Gareth did not answer for Lucetta. He looked to his wife. Mrs. Denby followed his gaze, understood, and curtsied to Lucetta. "Yes, Your Grace." The dowager's fingers tightened once upon her cane. Lucetta expected resistance. Instead, the older woman looked at the sideways hourglass and said, "The nursery cabinet has been emptied. The old things are wrapped and stored. Nothing will be placed there again without your permission." The apology beneath the words was not soft enough to be affection, but it was real enough to be accepted. Lucetta inclined her head. "Thank you." She did not add "Your Grace." The dowager heard the omission and did not correct it. Later, when the household had dispersed and luncheon had passed, with the gentle awkwardness of people learning new rules, Lucetta walked alone through the glass house. Blackmere's glass house was long and warm, filled with lemon trees, ferns, damp stone, and the quiet industry of things growing without hurry. Outside, August light spread over the lawns. Inside, the air smelled of earth and green leaves. Lucetta paused beside a bench where a ledger rested open. Not the Heir ledger, her own. The Blackmere Household Relief Fund for Women in Reduced Circumstances had begun as a practical list in her hand and had become, with Gareth's support and without his command, a small but solid instrument of change. Widows whose references had been injured by vindictive employers. Daughters whose guardians delayed allowances. Maids dismissed for telling truths inconvenient to rank. Lucetta had written each name herself, because she understood now that records could wound or restore depending upon who held the pen. She touched the page, then looked up when the glass-house door opened. Gareth entered without haste, his hat in one hand, his expression gentler than the man in the wedding gallery could ever have allowed himself to be. "Mrs. Denby says the village children have already asked whether Thursdays include cake. Naturally, reform fails when it neglects cake." His smile appeared fully then, rare and unguarded. "I will inform the cook that the Duchess has issued a constitutional principle. The Duchess has issued several. The Duke is expected to remember them. The Duke has begun writing them down." He glanced at her ledger. "May I?" She turned the book toward him. He read standing beside her, not over her shoulder. That, too, had become one of their quiet languages. When he reached the line naming Mrs. Vale as advisor on household references, his face softened. She will be good at it. She knows what fear sounds like when it asks for work, and you know what justice looks like when it offers it. Lucetta closed the ledger. "Do not make me too noble, Gareth. I am still angry some mornings." "Good." She raised a brow. "Good." Anger remembers the road after forgiveness has made the house comfortable. The answer moved through her like warmth. She had feared, in the first days after the public reckoning, that tenderness might become another kind of pressure, that gratitude might be expected to finish what truth had begun. Gareth had not asked her to hurry. He had written to Penrose Cottage instead of summoning her. He had sent household plans for her approval and accepted the pages returned with corrections in her hand. He had removed the empty frame before mentioning Blackmere Abbey again. He had waited until she chose the date of arrival. Most difficult of all, for a duke trained to command, he had allowed love to become daily behavior rather than a single declaration beneath candles. Lucetta looked toward the far end of the glass house, where panes of light lay across the floor. "I thought I would feel triumph when I saw the frame gone." "And did you?" "No, I felt quiet." "Is quiet a disappointment?" "No," she turned back to him. "It may be the thing I wanted all along." Gareth set his hat on the bench. "Then I hope this house gives you a great deal of it." Lucetta smiled faintly. "Not too much. I have plans. I have learned to be both grateful and afraid when you say that." "Wise man." She reached for his hand. He gave it at once, open-palmed, still never presuming that yesterday's permission guaranteed today's. Lucetta lifted his hand and kissed his knuckles. The gesture startled him so deeply that his breath caught. The Duke of Blackmere, who could face creditors, county meetings, and a gallery full of hostile witnesses, looked undone by tenderness freely given. "Lucetta," he said softly, "may I?" She knew what he asked. She loved that he still asked. The word had become not doubt, but devotion shaped into manners. She stepped closer, her hand still holding his. "Always when I am asked." Gareth kissed her then, softly, in the green hush of the glass house, with the sun on the glass and the sideways hourglass resting between them at her throat. It was not the first kiss that followed justice. It was the first one that belonged entirely to peace. When he drew back, she remained close enough for his forehead to nearly touch hers. "I love you," he said, still as choice, always as choice. "I love you too," she answered, "not because you made a house safe for me, but because you learned that I was never waiting to be made safe. I was waiting to be believed." His eyes shone, but the tears did not fall this time. They had already had their night beneath the old frame. Today gave them something steadier. Lucetta turned the hourglass pendant between her fingers. Sideways, it was no longer a command. It was a memory disciplined into beauty. Beyond the glass, Amabel laughed, with 2 village children near the lawn, and the sound carried lightly through the open pane. Gareth looked toward it, then back at Lucetta, and neither of them mistook the sound for a promise demanded by blood. It was simply life in a house that had stopped counting. Lucetta rested her hand in his arm, and together they walked from the glass house toward the open gallery, where the new painting caught afternoon light and no empty frame waited above them. For the first time in generations, Blackmere did not wait for an heir before calling itself blessed.